Chapter 1261. Li Qingshan clutched his chest. He felt a tightness in his heart, and his ears were buzzing. Qingshan, don't get distracted. Ha ha ha, we are doomed. Our voyage ends here. Jiyu Yangying's urging and Luo Huxiaoming's wild laughter pulled Li Qingshan's consciousness back. He found himself in a dangerous situation. Perhaps it was an illusion caused by the moment of being swallowed by the space-devouring beast, but he would never have such a strong reaction because of danger. Little Anne. The inside of the space-devouring beast was as quiet as the void. Countless fragments of the world floated quietly, including the mountain that just now had been swallowed. Li Qingshan felt as if he had entered a different world. He no longer had to drift in the void, and this gave him an indescribable sense of security. However, the danger of death didn't disappear. Instead, it became stronger. These two feelings intertwined and formed an extremely strange mental state. He held his breath and clenched the living soil of the Nine Heaven, as if something terrible was about to happen. Kunpeng folded its wings as well, shielding Li Qingshan and Luo Huxiaoming, watching everything around. Only Luo Huxiaoming couldn't stop laughing. He laughed at fate, laughed at himself, until Li Qingshan slapped him on the back of his head. He turned around and glared at Li Qingshan. Looking into a pair of dark eyes, there was fear and despair in those eyes, but it wasn't enough to shake his strong will. Jiyu Yangying laughed and said, "Little Ming, you've been beaten again, haven't you? While you're laughing, please think of a way to help us get out of this." These two. Luo Huxiaoming said, "I'm sorry, I can't do it either." He had already said the last word, but it seemed to have shrunk countless times. It wasn't that his voice had been lowered, but his sense of existence had been greatly reduced. Li Qingshan watched a mountain suddenly disappear. When he looked closer, he found that the mountain didn't disappear. Instead, it shrank to the size of a fist and flew away, guided by an invisible force. Kunpeng suddenly shrank by 10 times. Jiyu Yangying said, "I didn't do it. The space-devouring beast is digesting us." The space-devouring beast dared to swallow them, so it naturally had the ability to digest them. This compression. Like the wriggling of the stomach, it could destroy everything. If it were not for Kunpeng's protection, Rahu and Xiaoming would be dead for sure. Even Li Qingshan might have died on the spot. Luo Huxiaoming said, "Do you understand now? Soon, we will be crushed into meat paste." "No. Meat paste." Li Qingshan said, "I don't like either of them. I don't." Kunpeng spread its wings and flew. The Kunpeng spread its wings and flew in the opposite direction of the mountain. Li Qingshan leaned against the Kunpeng's back. Luo Huxiaoming glanced at him. Suddenly, he thought of another man, the man he thought he had forgotten. "Father, am I still weak?" It felt like a million years. Or maybe it was just a pause between one heartbeat. Li Qingshan had a flash of inspiration. It's coming. Earth force field was fully activated. In that instant, it was soundless, but it felt like the world was collapsing. Kunpeng's body shrank again. Its wingspan was less than 100 miles. Li Qingshan seemed to have been punched. His face turned red, but his expression became more stubborn. He turned and spat out a mouthful of blood. The Nine Heaven living soil was his divine tool. Not only did it provide him with endless power, it could also greatly increase the power of the ox demon god Art. But it was not his own power. Just now, he had almost used up all his demon chi. He could only replenish it from the small world. The forceful compression of the earth force field produced a violent backlash. It was supported by the phoenix's life force. Luo Huxiaoming, on the other hand, was unharmed. "Yangying, shrink your body. Come into the earth force field." Jiyu Yangying was worried. "But can you hold on? You have to let Kunpeng conserve its power," said Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan said, even if he could not escape death, he had to be the toughest bone to digest. Luo Huxiaoming suddenly thought of something. He suddenly said, "Stop. Turn around." "What?" "The body of the swallowing void beasts is not that easy to break. Even if we manage to escape, we will still be hunted down. We have to go deeper into the swallowing void beasts and fight for our lives." "Makes sense. That's more like it." Li Qingshan smiled and patted Luo Huxiaoming's shoulder. The mental communication was completed in an instant. Kuan-Peng shrank its body without hesitation, turned around, and flew at full speed. She used all her strength, but the speed of flying was still not as fast as in the void. She said, "Qingshan, hold on." In a moment, Li Qingshan suffered 2 more heavy pressures. His tall and sturdy body shrank. His internal organs were all ruptured. His brain was a mess, and his indestructible tiger bones were full of cracks. He half knelt on Kuan-Peng's back with his head lowered. His body was covered in blood, but he did not move. He silently counted the coming of the next heavy pressure. This would probably be the last time, however, the heavy pressure did not come. Kuan-Peng passed through an invisible barrier. Li Qingshan raised his head and asked, "Did we succeed?" He could vaguely see many twinkling stars in front of him. Could it be that he had returned to the void? Luo Huxiaoming answered, "Yes, almost succeeded. We have already left the stomach of the swallowing void beast. This is probably its womb. Those are just embryonic swallowing void beasts." Li Qingshan's broken eyes recovered, and his eyesight became clear again. He saw tens of thousands of baby swallowing void beasts huddled together. Their eyes were glowing, if they were eyes. You call these baby swallowing void beasts? These bloody things were all strange. None of them looked like their mother, and none of them could be counted as baby. Jiyu Yangying gave a bitter smile and said, "They are so small. I don't think they are aggressive yet." While she was talking, all baby swallowing void beasts moved, approaching them. "I guess these little things are not here to greet us." Li Qingshan curved his mouth corners. This scene was like a nightmare of countless swallowing void beasts, which seemed a bit ridiculous. The group of swallowing void beasts approached quickly. If they retreated, they would be digested; if they advanced, they would be eaten. Jiyu Yangying said, "Oi, you 2 men, think of something." Luo Huxiaoming said, "Thank you, but I'm just a child." Li Qingshan gazed at the incoming group of swallowing void beasts. "Little Ming, I think you said that the swallowing void beasts turned into worlds." "Yeah. I just happen to have a world. In other words, I have a swallowing void beast." Luo Huxiaoming's eyes lit up. "That's right. All of you, close your eyes." Jiyu Yangying and Luo Huxiaoming both closed their eyes. Kuan-Peng closed his eyes as well. Li Qingshan brought his palms together and unleashed the spirit turtle's ability, Water Mirror's image. Little An's figure appeared in his mind. She seemed to be in both pain and sorrow. Afterwards, she closed her eyes as well. God bless us. Chapter 1262. In the small world, time flowed by and the sun and moon passed by. Regardless of whether there was a god or not, the world will was the same from start to finish. It operated according to its own set rules, which was called destiny. From a certain perspective, the world will was like a lazy master. It was indifferent to the various matters of the house, and the slightest carelessness would cause the world to change. Only when a thief entered the house would it react slightly. It was almost instinctive, similar to how the space-devouring beasts digested their food. The existence of a god was equivalent to an autocratic butler who could act on behalf of the master. Li Qingshan had been a thief, and after many hardships, he had finally become a butler. When he satisfied the most primitive desire of this lazy master with a large number of world fragments, mountains, and land, he had obtained the master's approval. In other words, he had obtained the destiny. Normally, as a butler, Li Qingshan could do whatever he wanted as long as he had enough power. He would not care about what the lazy master thought. It would be best if the master did not have any thoughts at all, so that he could control the destiny of the world. However, at this moment, he had no choice but to awaken the world will. However, he did not have much confidence in his success. Whether the world will could traverse such a long distance through the moon's mirror and deceive the group of void-devouring beasts like other things was still unknown. Success or failure depended on this. Li Qingshan slowly opened his eyes. The space-devouring beasts were swimming around them, as if wondering why their food had suddenly disappeared. Success. Jiyu Yangying and Luo Huxiaoming could not believe it. Li Qingshan did not reply. He could feel the vast and empty world will with him. If that was all, it would be fine. What was even more amazing was that a deep blue bubble that looked like a spore was rapidly expanding. It enveloped them and gave them a deep and peaceful feeling. It was as if they had returned to the small world. However, the texture of this blue bubble was very similar to the surrounding space-devouring beasts. In other words, it was a space-devouring beast. As it grew larger, it grew a long tail. It swayed gently. It looked like a tadpole. The space-devouring beasts completely lost interest and gradually dispersed. What's going on? Luo Huxiaoming was also shocked. Even with his knowledge and experience as a god, he had never heard of such a thing. This, Li Qingshan couldn't answer either. His original plan was to use the world will to bluff his way through. This was to prevent the void-devouring beasts from treating them as food. Who would have thought that a true void-devouring beast would be born? Jiyu Yangying guessed, could this be the original form of the small world? But why would it appear here? Was it because this was the womb of the void-devouring beast? Could this be a clone of the small world? Qingshan, how is the small world? Are there any changes? Li Qingshan shrugged. Everything is normal. Maybe it's to buy a house and give a pet as a gift. Alright, we've escaped another calamity. Luo Huxiaoming heaved a sigh of relief. This probably involved the most fundamental laws of the 3,000 worlds and the boundless void, and there were too many coincidences. Perhaps only the gods of the 9 heavens could give an answer, or even the gods of the 9 heavens would sigh. After all, there were very few world gods. After becoming a god, they would be forever trapped in a world, unable to travel in the void. Not many cultivators would travel to the void either. If they had the ability, they would not be devoured by the void-devouring beasts, nor would they enter the womb of the void-devouring beasts. The probability of each of these events happening was extremely low, and it was practically impossible for all of them to happen together. As they spoke, the void-devouring beast stopped growing, and its length reached 30,000 zhong. Jiyu Yangying said, Qingshan, can you control this little void-devouring beast? Once it grows up, it won't swallow us first, will it? It can't be considered absolute control, but I can indeed control it. Li Qingshan sensed for a moment. As a world god, he could act in place of the world will. That's good. Alright, this is what it means to be blessed after surviving a great disaster. Yangying, put away your Kuan Peng feathers. Let's try out our new ride. Li Qingshan waved his hand. Let's go, Deep Blue Fatty. Luo Huxiaoming said, wait, Deep Blue Fatty is. The void-devouring beast swayed its tail and swam forward. The corner of Luo Huxiaoming's eye twitched. Why? Li Qingshan said matter-of-factly, there has to be a name, so you know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, we'll be facing a group of little void-devouring beasts in the stomach of a big void-devouring beast. Luo Huxiaoming pursed his lips and nodded. Alright, I know the answer, but why do you have to call it such a stupid name? Because it's dark blue, likes to eat, and is very fat. Don't you think this name? Luo Huxiaoming raised his hand. Alright, pretend I didn't ask. Thus, the three of them rode little Fatty through the huge womb of the void-devouring beast. Li Qingshan opened his eyes wide and looked around, observing the shape of every void-devouring beast. It was as if he was touring the underwater world in his previous life. Jiyu Yangying said, Qingshan, can your new pet teleport us out? Li Qingshan replied without turning his head, why do we have to go out? Aren't we going to kill this void-devouring beast? There's no other way. Killing such a huge void-devouring beast is probably not an easy task. Who knows if there are any dangers ahead? Why don't we think of a way to return to the void? The void-devouring beasts shouldn't attack their own kind. Yes, the void-devouring beasts shouldn't attack their own kind, Li Qingshan mumbled to himself. He then asked, what do you think, little Ming? Of course. Otherwise, with the power of the void-devouring beasts, who knows how many worlds would be devoured? Then I'm relieved. Li Qingshan smiled brightly. Deep Blue Little Fatty suddenly pounced toward a nearby void-devouring beast covered in tentacles. It opened its mouth wide and bit down on one of the tentacles. What are you doing? Jiyu Yangying and Luo Hu Xiaoming were both shocked. That void-devouring beast was more than 10 times bigger than Deep Blue Little Fatty. This was practically a suicide attack. Li Qingshan laughed. I'm not a gentleman if I don't take revenge. Watch me kill its entire family first. Jiyu Yangying and Luo Hu Xiaoming both tensed up. Although the void-devouring beasts wouldn't attack their own kind, no one knew what would happen if they were attacked by their own kind. If they angered the void-devouring beasts, the consequences would be unimaginable. As expected, the void-devouring beast didn't retaliate. It just wandered away. Meanwhile, Deep Blue Little Fatty devoured the broken tentacles and grew stronger bit by bit. Although it was being controlled by Li Qingshan to attack its own kind, it didn't show any signs of objecting. It continued to eat with relish. Li Qingshan could feel the favor of heavens will more and more. When it's worth fighting, we should fight. Otherwise, there will come a day when we won't be able to fight even if we want to. Chapter 1263. The three of them were not lacking in courage. They dared to fight at the critical moment. If they had a powerful space-swallowing beast to protect them, their journey would be much smoother. And it turned out that Li Qingshan had one. The terrifying group of space-swallowing beasts had become harmless now. They could only dodge Deep Blue Fatty's attacks. Moreover, they did not learn their lesson. They would stop after running for a while. Deep Blue Fatty was like a wolf in a flock of sheep. It bit here and there, slowly growing from a small wolf to a vicious wolf. The other space-swallowing beasts could not resist. Devour, devour, devour. One space-swallowing beast after another disappeared into its mouth. However, it did not grow as fast as expected. Sometimes, after a period of digestion, it would become smaller. Li Qingshan discovered the reason. The miniature world on the horizon rapidly grew larger as well. Perhaps it could no longer be referred to as a miniature world anymore. It was a miniature world at the very least. That was where Deep Blue Little Fatty's original body resided. He was becoming more and more worthy of his title as the god of the world. It could be said that he could destroy mountains with a single thought. After a life-and-death ordeal, he finally had the time to focus on the small world. Many ships set out to sea in search of the power of the Hero King. Countless people perished in the sea, but there were also many lucky ones who obtained unprecedented power and ran amok on the sea. Literature plus this attracted more people to the sea. For a time, dragons and snakes rose, and heroes came forth. Every day, there were battles and killings, and every day, there were new legends. The martial arts that had passed away seemed to have returned, becoming even more turbulent. Everyone in the world believed that this was the will of the Hero King. After all, such a world was more interesting. The strict rule of the past was all the work of the world society's leader, Jiyu Yangying. It did not suit the old man's true preferences. However, the world society naturally would not give up on the rule of the world. The Hero King's sons became the pioneers of this adventure. Li Guanyin brought Big Turtle Ninja to establish his base on the sea. He directed the Xuanxu Hall to the spiritual islands, trying to restore order to the chaotic sea. With the advantage of his innate bloodline, he traveled through the raging waves. He was called the Sea King. When the world became bigger and bigger, as the spirit chi became denser, the birds in the sky and the fish in the deep sea all had more possibilities. The White Ape King and the Phantom Dancer were no longer coincidental. The demon race was on the rise. In front of me, the governor of the Eastern Sea. The World Assembly was nothing. The Hero King is nothing. A big ship was floating on the sea. The deck was bustling with noise, as if a wild celebration was taking place. The captain's drunken ramblings caused the deck to fall silent. The name of the chivalrous king was deeply rooted in people's hearts. However, no one dared to oppose the cruel governor of the East Sea. Bah, what a big idiot. There was a man tied to the mast. His tanned skin was riddled with scars, but he didn't seem to care at all. The Eastern Sea governor flew into a rage. Chop off his hands and feet and immediately sink him into the sea. No, I'll do it myself. With a sinister smile, he walked over and brandished the treasured saber he had just obtained. Puff! The Navy admiral was crushed to death on the deck like a bug. Flesh and blood covered the floor, and the treasured sword was stuck in the middle. Ah! The deck was in a state of panic. The desperadoes who usually licked blood on the edge of their blades were now screaming like girls. The man froze for a moment, then laughed loudly. This caused the pirates to gradually come to their senses. They surrounded the Navy Admiral with malicious intentions, ready to carry out the Navy Admiral's last wish. The man said, "You can kill me, or you can let me be the captain. Otherwise, with your meager cultivation, you won't be able to protect anything in the cabin." The pirates looked at each other. They had never seen such a shameless person. However, this man's swordsmanship was superb, and he had almost cultivated the white ape sword technique to the extreme. In terms of strength, he was above the dead governor of the East Sea. Once he was let go, no one would be able to control him. Don't listen to his nonsense. Let's kill him first, then we'll find a remote dock to divide our things and disperse. The man's expression did not change. Don't forget how that idiotic governor died. Xiong Tian glanced at him. The knight-errant king has already remembered this ship. If not for me, his son, all of you would have sunk into the sea. You're the son of the knight-errant king? The pirates were shocked. They were all big shots. Illegitimate child. Sorry, old man Wu. Although you're not my biological father, I treat you like one in my heart. The pirates hesitated. There were many people in the world who claimed to be the illegitimate child of the knight-errant king, but just now, they did not dare to doubt him. Don't worry, not only do I not hold a grudge, I'm also loyal and trustworthy. I'm much better than that idiotic governor. After some argument, no one dared to make a move. They untied the man and unsealed his acupoints. He stretched his body and shouted, "Remember, my name is Wu Taishan. Wu as in Wu Huan, Tai as in Tai Dan, and Shan as in Qing Shan. Who hit me just now? Crawl over here." A pirate said, "Hey, your surname is not Li?" Wu Taishan grabbed him and spat on his face. "I took my stepfather's surname, can't I?" After beating up the pirates, he glanced at the pool of blood and flesh and broke out in a cold sweat. He thought to himself, "Knight-errant king, please protect me." He went to the cabin and stared at the statue of a woman. He had an inexplicable feeling that the woman would come back to life at any moment. A voice suddenly sounded in his mind, "Where is this?" "Qing Shan, now is not the time to watch a show." Jiyu Yangying's voice pulled Li Qingshan back to reality. Li Qingshan smiled and shook his head. In an instant, he had seen through Wu Tieshan's life. He did not expect to meet him once. The child from back then had already grown up. It was a great blessing to be able to obtain this statue. At this moment, Deep Blue Fatty was almost done eating. His body had already surpassed the smaller void-swallowing beasts. Now, he pounced on one and devoured the remaining void-swallowing beasts in no time. After Li Qingshan told him about the changes in the small world, he felt like his body was filled with spiritual qi. "You're really lucky." Luo Hu Xiaoming sighed. This was a world that could devour other worlds. If it continued to devour like this, would it devour the entire starry sky? When that happened, how big would the small world be? Of course, but is it appropriate for a natural-born god to praise others for being blessed? Li Qingshan smiled. He would not be arrogant enough to think that all of this was due to his own hard work, nor would he forget the fated encounter and the majestic back view. He only needed a heir to complete the inheritance. There was no need for an ignorant youth to ride on his back. It wasn't to repay any kindness, but to prove that you weren't wrong about him. Chapter 1264. Under Li Qingshan's hot-blooded and inexplicable command, Deep Blue Fatty rushed out of the womb and returned to the huge stomach of the big swallowing beast. Of course, this was a far-fetched description. The big swallowing beast was fundamentally different from ordinary creatures. Rather than saying that the stomach occupied most of its body, it was more accurate to say that everything in its body was in the stomach, which Luo Hu Xiaoming described as empty. Deep Blue Fatty's body suddenly shrank, but after the invisible pressure disappeared, it immediately returned to its original size and shape. Under Li Qingshan's will, it waved its long tail and swam into the depths of the stomach. It passed through a few more strange areas, but none of them posed a threat. Suddenly, A star appeared in the darkness, flickering with colorful light. What is that? Li Qingshan was surprised. In this deep darkness, everything could be seen clearly, but that star seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. It clearly only had 3 colors, red, yellow, and blue, but he felt that he had never seen anything so resplendent. Every color was changing: crimson, dark red, blood red, orange, bright yellow, azure, light blue, deep blue. There were so many that it could not be described with words. The 3 colors intertwined with each other, and it was ever-changing, containing all the colors in the world. As they drew closer and closer to the star, Li Qingshan also understood why the star was twinkling. Other than these 3 colors, there was also a colorless aura surging around the star. Every time the aura blew, the star would twinkle, and its shape and color would change subtly. So beautiful. Jiyu Yangying was also mesmerized by it, like a normal girl looking at a piece of jewelry. And it was a piece of jewelry from all over the world. Luo Hu Xiaoming said, "It's the world." Li Qingshan understood. Earth, fire, wind, and water. So this is the original appearance of the world. It must be the heart of this big swallowing beast. As they got closer, the star became bigger, and its brilliance became more dazzling. The heavy ground, the blazing fire, the raging wind, and the deep water all intertwined to form a magnificent scene. Even though they already knew that the big swallowing beast could nurture a world, they were still shocked when they saw it with their own eyes. The majestic power contained within it was enough to move anyone. Perhaps after millions of years, all of this would transform into a new world. Another new star would appear in the void. Then, countless living beings began to multiply. It transformed into endless love and hatred, sorrow and joy, separation and reunion. Luo Hu Xiaoming's knowledge was far above that of Li Qingshan and Jiyu Yangying, but looking at this scene, he could not help but think of the worlds that he had destroyed with his own hands, and for a moment, he was also speechless. And he noticed. Li Qingshan and Jiyu Yangying both entered the state of enlightenment. He didn't want to disturb her. Seeing the origin of the world with his own eyes. Such an opportunity was extremely rare even for him, and it was even more so for them. The word Dao comprehension contained endless profundities. The reason was simple. Just like how mortals would feel the abstract concept of life when they saw a newborn baby, they would feel deeply moved and perhaps change their words and actions. If mortals wanted to achieve something, they would need a lot of experience, let alone cultivators. The essence of cultivation was to seek truth and change. First, there must be a change in thinking, then there would be a change in cultivation. But for cultivators, such opportunities were increasingly rare. After seeing too much of life and death, there would not be any great enlightenment, and it would often take a long time to accumulate. If the accumulation was insufficient, there would be a bottleneck, and one's cultivation would not be able to advance. Sometimes, what one thought could surpass thousands of years of cultivation. That was why cultivators with high enlightenment had such a great advantage. Seeing a falling leaf and knowing the world was in autumn was already beyond the reach of ordinary people. And those monstrous geniuses who could understand the rules of the movement of all things and stars when they saw an apple fall to the ground were things that ordinary people could not even dream of. Although it was not impossible to make up for, it would take 100 times the effort and hard work. For this one thought, the 3 of them had experienced a great risk. Only at this moment did they truly obtain a reward that belonged to them. No matter how big the world was, no matter how strong little Fatty was, they were all external forces that could be borrowed but not relied on. Only enlightenment and cultivation belonged to oneself. After who knew how long, Jiyu Yangying returned to her senses. Her body and mind seemed to have gone through a baptism. She felt like she had become more and more integrated with the Kuan Peng feather. Even without the Kuan Peng feather, undergoing the 4th heavenly tribulation would no longer be difficult. It was not just because of what she saw, but because the cultivators of the 9 provinces had never even heard of this journey since they left the 9 provinces. She could not help but become more and more certain of her own path. She wanted to fly higher and further, see more and obtain true freedom. Looking back at Li Qingshan, she saw that he remained motionless. 2 stars condensed from earth, fire, wind, and water were reflected in his eyes. She knew that his comprehension and gains were greater than hers, so she watched over him quietly. However, what Li Qingshan saw was not just the existence of earth, fire, wind, and water. There was also the existence of emptiness. Without emptiness, the earth, fire, wind, and water could not be condensed. Without the earth, fire, wind, and water, emptiness would be meaningless. The earth, fire, wind, and water just happened to correspond to the 4 transformations he balanced: the ox demon transformation, the phoenix transformation, the tiger demon transformation, and the spirit turtle transformation. This was no coincidence. Instead, it was the foundation laid down by the 9 transformations of the demonic and divine. How grand was it to construct a world within one's body? Presumably, only by imitating the way the world was born and operated could he balance these extremely pure powers. In the battle against the Demon King in the Azura field back then, he had relied on controlling the earth, fire, wind, and water to turn defeat into victory. However, ever since then, the demon suppression statuary was deeply suppressed. When he comprehended the ape demon transformation, the balance was broken again. At this moment, he saw a brand new balance. Now that he thought about it, the main reason why he could balance the earth, fire, wind, and water was because he was in the Azura field. The Azura field was his emptiness. Once he left the Azura field, his powers would be drawn in by everything. The extremely subtle balance would no longer exist. All that remained was a general balance. At this moment, he saw an opportunity. The ape demon transformation just happened to represent emptiness. I understand now. When I cultivated the first 4 transformations, the balance was established. From then on, what I needed to balance was no longer the divine and demonic natures. Instead, I needed to construct a world within my body. The ape demon transformation is not a disruptor that disrupts the balance between the divine and the demonic. Instead, it is an indispensable power that allows this world to truly be established. With that in mind, Li Qingshan broke through to the 2nd layer of the ape demon transformation. Originally, he was worried that any slight improvement in his cultivation would attract the 4th heavenly tribulation, but he was no longer afraid now. Waves of power seeped out of his body. His aura weakened instead, but his power became even more condensed. The value of a sword forged from scrap metal was nowhere near the 3-foot-long blade. It could perhaps be used to smash people in battle, but if he wanted to improve it further, he would have to refine it again and again. He powered the spirit turtle transformation with all his might, deriving the embryonic form of the world before him. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, deriving it out of thin air, this was an almost impossible task. Now that he could see it, and he had also comprehended the operating laws of the minor world, things could not be simpler. After he finished deriving it, a model formed in his mind. He began to imitate it. First, he compressed and reorganized all the power in his body. Then, he constructed it in a better manner. If he transformed into his demonic form right now, his figure would definitely constantly shrink. No, it still won't work. The ape demon transformation is too weak. Emptiness can't accommodate earth, fire, wind, water unless I also raise the ape demon transformation to the 5th layer. However, the 1st and 2nd layers are still fine, but towards the end, the power will start to increase explosively, and the 4th heavenly tribulation will definitely descend. Li Qingshan frowned and pondered. Soon, he had an idea. Please protect me. Okay. Jiyu Yangying and Luo Hu Xiaoming both had a serious look on their faces. Their paths were the same, and their lives were entrusted to each other. Protecting him was just a small matter. Li Qingshan closed his eyes, and his body ignited in flames. One could vaguely see a phoenix dancing in the flames. Phoenix Nirvana, rebirth from the ashes. This was the first time Li Qingshan had actively used Phoenix Nirvana. In the past, he had been beaten to death by others, and he had no choice but to undergo Nirvana rebirth. This time, it felt very different. He was in the best state he had ever been, whether it was his body or his spirit. Moreover, there was a world providing him with spiritual power. After Nirvana, he was reborn. Before his strength began to recover, he established a new balance with all his might. When the ox demon did not move, the tiger demon leaped. The spirit turtle dove, and the phoenix danced. The ape demon spread its chest, and its arms constantly extended, embracing everything. With a boom, the demon core exploded, and a world was born in his body. Li Qingshan was overjoyed. This world was so tiny. Although it was only in its most primitive form, it had all 5 organs. The 5 organs were earth, fire, wind, water, and space. However, his aura had become much weaker. That was because he had suppressed the ox, tiger, turtle, and phoenix to the 2nd layer. The initial transformations of the 9 transformations of the demons and gods were very weak. With these 2 basic cultivation levels, it would not be strange for his strength to fall back to the demon general realm. At most, he would be a demon commander. However, he was clearly still a demon king right now. If Deep Blue Little Fatty risking his life to devour the void-devouring beasts was a gamble, then he was a steam engine turning into a reactor. He had undergone a qualitative change. Next, he could continue cultivating the ape demon transformation. This was not difficult for him. Once he reached the 5th layer, the power of the other transformations would be completely restored. By then, he would possess unprecedented power. It was almost equivalent to going through 4 heavenly tribulations. The most amazing thing was that according to his calculations, he would still not attract 4 heavenly tribulations by then. He would still be a demon king, and he would be able to return to the 9 provinces and reunite with little Anne. How is this possible? What kind of cultivation method is this? Luo Hu and Little Ming were shocked. This wasn't an aura that a fiend king could possess at all. Ordinary cultivators often had to rely on crossing tribulation in order to produce this kind of transformation. How could they jump up from where they were and immediately fly away? The 9 transformations of the demons and gods. Li Qingshan revealed the truth out of trust and confidence. He also wanted to understand the relevant information from Luo Hu Xiaoming. Brother Niu was not a nobody. Luo Hu Xiaoming thought for a while and shook his head. I've never heard of it. Such a cultivation method should not be unknown. Then, it could only be a new creation. Moreover, it was only passed on to him, or it was created for him. I'm really a little envious of your luck. Isn't that your father? My father plows the fields. That's my big brother. Li Qingshan laughed and waved his hand. Devour, Little Fatty. Chapter 1265. Deep Blue Fatty seemed to have been impatient for a long time, but without Li Qingshan's will, it could not surpass its instincts to attack its own kind. Now that it was finally authorized, it immediately opened its mouth and swallowed the dazzling star made of earth, fire, wind, water. The balance of the star was instantly broken. The earth cracked, the fire burned violently, the wind blew, and the flood surged. A world that was about to be born was destroyed. Deep Blue Fatty's body was instantly expanded by more than 10 times, almost losing its original shape, as if it was about to burst. The earth, fire, wind, and water were not really water and fire, but the purest energy, the original substance of the world. Even great cultivators and monster kings in the face of this scene were as helpless as mortals in the face of a natural disaster. Li Qingshan and the other 2 hid in an unknown organ in Deep Blue. Separated by a transparent membrane, they gazed at the soul-stirring sight in the stomach. They all sighed in amazement, as well as comprehending some things. This void-swallowing beast is huge, so the world it created must be huge too. Can you, Little Fatty, digest it? Luo Hu Xiaoming endured the discomfort of the name and expressed his concern. Li Qingshan answered, even a god like you doesn't know, how would I know? It's about to become Big Fatty. All right. I think it's better to call him Little Fatty. Luo Hu Xiaoming felt that his tolerance for these stupid names was limited. Li Qingshan looked pleased. You finally have some taste for names, Little Ming. Luo Hu Xiaoming's eyes twitched. Li Qingshan, you and I will fight. Jiyu Yangying interrupted their eye fight. We were lucky. Without Little Fatty, even if we killed the big swallowing beast, we wouldn't be able to withstand such an explosion of energy. We would still be dead. Li Qingshan said, it's not just luck. If we didn't eat those little void-swallowing beasts, little fatty wouldn't have been able to swallow this star. At this time, the violent energy torrent gradually calmed down, like water being sucked dry by a sponge. In the small world, be it on the surface or in the deep sea, whether it was active or not. Or did he take advantage of the situation for a long time? All the volcanoes erupted at the same time. Lava and underground fire gushed out, and billowing black smoke rushed into the sky. Strong winds swept across the entire world. Gales, storms, tornadoes. It surged between heaven and earth. But it could not blow away the dark clouds that covered the sky. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Torrential rain poured down like a torrent. Floodwaters overflowed and surged wantonly. This doomsday-like scene made even the most arrogant and ferocious martial artists tremble. The ship was like a toy, being tossed up high by the waves and falling back down heavily. Passing through the mountain-like waves, he felt as if he was sailing in the deep sea. Wu Taizhan personally manned the helm, but it was useless. The pirates behind him kept shouting, "Chivalrous lord, spare us." He couldn't help but think, could it be that my mother lied to me? Am I really her son? My dear father, stop messing around. Bang! A huge wave smashed the ship into pieces. Wooden fragments filled the sky, as well as countless rare treasures. Wu Taizhan took a deep breath and found the statue of the woman. He leaped over and carried the statue into the sea. Li Qingshan didn't have the time to care about the changes in the small world. He wasn't the goddess of mercy who saved people from suffering. Everyone had their own fates. He was focused on how Deep Blue Little Fatty was sending the earth, fire, wind, and water back to the small world. When Deep Blue Little Fatty was devouring the small space-devouring beasts, he tried to figure this out, but he couldn't see anything similar to a teleportation gate. It was the same now. There seemed to be an invisible channel between Deep Blue Little Fatty and the small world. It connected them together in a way that he couldn't understand. It was even closer than the connection between him and his mirror image. Just like how the 6 paths of reincarnation could connect all the worlds. After a while, the earth, fire, wind, and water disappeared. Deep Blue Little Fatty grew much bigger and more active. Li Qingshan shook his head. There were too many mysteries in the world. Perhaps, he could only find the answers after he reached the 9 heavens. Fortunately, he didn't have to worry about losing contact with his mirror image anymore. He felt like he was still in the small world. The connection between him and his mirror image became very clear again. However, he felt a little regretful. It's a pity that I'm not strong enough. Otherwise, if I could absorb the earth, fire, wind, and water, I would be able to push the 4 transformations to unimaginable heights. However, it's all in the small world. I can keep it and slowly absorb it. Perhaps the small world couldn't be called a small world anymore. Not only had it become 10 times bigger, but the flow of time had also become much faster. Although it still couldn't compare to the 9 provinces, when it completely digested everything it had devoured, it would be able to accommodate a second heavenly tribulation. In the deep void, the great space-devouring beast was floating in the darkness, looking for new food. Suddenly, its body contorted violently and began to crumble, revealing Deep Blue Little Fatty within. Jiyu Yangying said, "The great space-devouring beast is dead. We've succeeded." Luo Hu Xiaoming also breathed a sigh of relief. They had finally escaped. Furthermore, their journey from now on was very secure. With the great space-devouring beast as a mount, there was almost no need to worry about any danger. Li Qingshan looked at the pieces of the great space-devouring beast's corpse floating in the void. He rubbed his chin and said, "Do you guys think that if we stay here, will we attract more great space-devouring beasts?" This was a very profitable business. The larger the small world became, the more abundant and pure spiritual qi he could obtain, and Deep Blue Little Fatty would also become stronger. Perhaps he could go to the demon domain in the future and devour Qiong Qi. Then, he wouldn't have to worry about the 500-year promise anymore. Luo Hu Xiaoming mocked, "That's not something you can decide." As they spoke, Deep Blue Little Fatty had already started to eat, ignoring Li Qingshan's attempts to stop it. It devoured the great space-devouring beast's corpse in large mouthfuls. When the great space-devouring beast was destroyed, it was no longer seen as one of its kind. Although Li Qingshan could make the great space-devouring beast surpass its own instincts to attack its own kind with his status as the world god, he couldn't suppress its instinct to devour anything. After all, it was not an obedient pet. Li Qingshan shrugged. Gluttons are always hard to stop, but we don't have the time to do that anyway. If we stay here any longer, Little An will get anxious. Alright, let's return to the flight path first. Using the stars in the sky, he deduced his current location. In order to maintain the balance of the 5 powers in his body, he had no choice but to suppress his own power, causing his overall strength to weaken. Only his deduction ability had become stronger, which was a pleasant surprise. A moment later, Li Qingshan said, "Little Fatty, start the teleportation." In the blink of an eye, Deep Blue Little Fatty appeared millions of miles away, back where they had been devoured by the great space-devouring beast. Floating Astronomy. Chapter 1266. Jiyu Yangying said, "It's really convenient. I can save some energy." Luo Hu Xiaoming said, "The void-swallowing beast was born in the void and grew up in the void. Even if the Kuan Peng had the power to travel through the void, it wouldn't be so comfortable." Li Qingshan said, "You too, will be home soon." Luo Hu Xiaoming sneered, "Home?" Jiyu Yangying smiled, "Home. Even a bird needs a piece of sky. I admit that the 9 provinces is a bit small, but it's still better than here." Jiyu Yangying tilted her head and thought for a moment, "That makes sense." Li Qingshan pressed Luo Hu Xiaoming's shoulder, "And you'll go home sooner or later and take back everything that belongs to you." Luo Hu Xiaoming frowned, then smiled again, "That's right. Don't forget to help me when the time comes." "Sure, but you'll probably have to help me fight first." Li Qingshan reached out his hand. Many years later, in the Azura field, Li Qingshan had made the same request for the same enemy, the hungry ghost Rel. And this time, Luo Hu Xiaoming readily agreed, "No problem." He also reached out his hand. The 2 hands, one big and one small, held each other tightly. This was the meaning of a man's promise, a common enemy. Jiyu Yangying suddenly had a feeling that perhaps each other was their biggest gain, and this was also her gain. Because of different fates, she found people who could support each other. This was a great fortune. Li Qingshan shook his head and sighed, "But you're too useless now." Luo Hu Xiaoming said angrily, "Say that again," but he felt the billowing spiritual energy coming from the big hand, and he couldn't help but be stunned. Li Qingshan said seriously, "The small world has become bigger, and the spiritual energy has become more abundant. Other than deducing the path, I don't need so much spiritual energy for now. From now on, I'll do my best to help you raise your cultivation. What do you think?" Jiyu Yangying didn't say anything. She stretched out her hand, and her slender fingers felt as sharp as an eagle's claw. Li Qingshan gently held her hand. Their eyes met. His tiger eyes were like fire, and his eagle eyes were like lightning. None of them were willing to retreat. Luo Hu Xiaoming rolled his eyes. He closed his eyes. Jiyu Yangying closes her eyes and starts to refine the Reiki. Li Qingshan smiled triumphantly and began to deduce the next path with all his might. He no longer mobilized just the spirit turtle's power. Instead, it was the newborn world within his body. This was the true secret behind the improvement of his deduction ability, because it originated from the 9 transformations of demons and gods. Li Qingshan named it the heart of the gods and demons. In the small world, the sun was shining brightly, and the blue sky was filled with white clouds. The seagulls were chirping, and the atmosphere was peaceful. Even the sea regained its calmness. The long and winding coastline was full of debris that was swept up by the waves. Wu Taizhan carried the heavy statue and walked to the beach step by step. He fell to the ground in exhaustion, but he forced himself to stand up and looked around. "Where is this? I don't remember there being such a big island in the nearby sea, and it's so barren." The woman statue's moving voice resounded in his mind, "This is not an island, but a continent." Wu Taizhan was used to seeing many strange things on the sea. A statue that could talk did not seem too strange to him. "Impossible, there is only one continent in the world." Wait, since there can be a new island, why can't there be a new continent? At this time, the plants on the barren land began to sprout and grow at a speed visible to the naked eye. The woman statue was also silent. She was born in the apocalypse, and the spiritual energy was scarce. This was an aura she had never felt before. The spiritual energy might not be pure, but it was full of vitality, like a newborn baby with endless possibilities. Above the vast sea, a new continent was formed. It was more than 10 times bigger than the original continent, and it was quickly dyed with a new layer of green. Sigh, the many islands have already made this sea full of bloodshed, and now a new continent has appeared. This is really, really great. Long live the Hero King. The woman statue asked, who is the Hero King that you keep talking about? The greatest person in history. The woman statue was silent again. Thinking about it, he was just a powerful native of this small world. How could he be considered a great person? However, it was I, a native, who saved you. Who are you? The woman statue asked. She did not expect that someone could directly pry into her mind. I am Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan was originally observing the changes in the small world, and the vitality that sprouted on the new continent made him understand something. Among the 3 remaining shadows in his sea of consciousness, another shadow gradually protruded. He immediately held his breath, waiting for the new change of the 9 transformations of demons and gods. But perhaps his understanding wasn't enough. The shadow didn't really appear in the end. Li Qingshan did not feel disappointed, because he could feel that the seed had already been planted, and it was only a matter of time before it sprouted. Right now, he had a heart of demons and gods that needed to be tempered and grown, so he was not in a hurry to learn the new changes. Because Wu Tai-shan and this woman statue were the first visitors of this new continent, and they were existences that he had paid attention to, he took a glance and heard the woman's thoughts. The woman statue said, so you have become the god of this world, but even a god shouldn't have this kind of power. Normal gods naturally don't have it. Fellow Daoist, please help me get rid of this state. What can you repay me with? Up until now, you haven't even said a word of thanks. Thank you. I will definitely repay you. You know that I didn't lie to you. Li Qingshan couldn't help but admire this woman's temperament. In a situation where there was no hope, everyone would panic, or be angry or resentful, but she was able to use this to increase her persuasiveness. But a person's heart can change. The great Hero King, the god of this world, are you afraid that I will go back on my words? Hey, just now, you are still a native. Do you mind if I get to know you? It's mainly to understand your world. The woman hesitated for a moment, then said, please. After going through this desperate situation, she just wanted to start over, treating it as a dragon in shallow water being teased by shrimps. Just now, Li Qingshan had been struggling to survive, so he didn't have time to pay attention to the islands formed by the fragments of the world. At this moment, his mind swept through the archipelago, and at the same time, he went deep into the woman's mind, and 2 pieces of information appeared in his mind. It was a world that was 1 level larger than the 9 provinces, and cultivators had to go through 5 heavenly tribulations to be able to ascend. However, as the end of the world was approaching, and the spiritual chi was weak, there were very few cultivators who could go through 2 or 3 heavenly tribulations, let alone 5. But this woman had gone through 4 heavenly tribulations, and was known as Stone Empress. Whether in terms of talent, bloodline, or willpower, she was a top-notch cultivator. If it wasn't for the fact that the connection with the 6 paths of reincarnation was completely cut off when the world declined, she even had the chance to ascend and become Stone Empress, but the result could only be considered as bad luck. But now, it seemed that even her luck was very good, and that was why she could come back from death's door in such an incredible way. She was the only survivor of that world. Although that world had declined, the cultivation path had developed to the extreme. Whether in terms of quality or quantity, it was far above the 9 provinces, and it contained a lot of valuable knowledge. Originally, he was just picking up trash, but he didn't expect to find a treasure. Floating astronomy. Chapter 1267. Li Qingshan was thinking of switching to a human cultivation technique. The War Devil catalogue originally came from the infernal domain, so it could be cultivated to a very high realm. However, The version he obtained had been modified several times, and it was not the complete version. At most, he could reach the fourth heavenly tribulation. It was impossible for him to enter the infernal domain to ask for the complete cultivation technique from the fighting demon clan. When he could ignore the threat of the 12 demon gods and enter the infernal domain to fight Chungchi, what use would he have for the fighting demon catalogue? To wipe his ass. In terms of practicality, although war demon possession was a very good move, after he condensed the heart of the fiend god in his body was balanced, and the 5 transformations had become one. Adding another war demon was really not very beneficial. Even in battle, he would have to use the 9 transformations of the demons and gods as the core and use the human cultivation method as support. Thus, he opened up his mind and searched the archipelago. Sure enough, he found many jade slips, but they had all lost their spiritual chi. Even if they could gradually recover as spiritual chi seeped into them, the information stored inside would no longer exist. He did find some cultivation techniques carved on the mountain rocks, but they were all incomplete, and their standards were not very high. They could not even compare to the War Devil catalogue. Come to think of it, a slightly decent cultivation technique already contained a lot of information, enough to be written into hundreds of books. As for the technique he needed, it might not even be enough to fill up a mountain with words. It seemed like he would have to rely on Empress Stoneheart. Fellow Daoist, I can help you return to your original state, but I advise you to maintain this state first. You've already gone through 4 heavenly tribulations. Although I've lost all my cultivation, I'm still not allowed to exist in this world. Fellow Daoist, as the god of the world, can't you even handle such a small matter? If you have any requests, why don't you tell me? I'll do my best. Although I have a request, it's not that easy to satisfy. I need a cultivation method to replace my current cultivation method. The cultivation method that I cultivate is called the Devil Suppression Statuary, and it's transformed from the Devil Region's War Devil Clan's War Devil Statuary. I then reversed it and deduced the Demon War catalogue, and even used it to condense a demon heart. In terms of cultivation, they were basically no different from demon folk now. Now, he wants to return to the path of ordinary human cultivators. Do you have any ideas? Li Qingshan found it a little hard to pronounce. It wasn't easy for him to go from being a demon to being a Buddha, but he just had to go from being a Buddha to being a demon. Once the demon heart was formed, it would not be easy to turn it back. Therefore, he did not hold much hope. You are already the god of the world. From then on, he would live as long as heaven and earth. Why would he still need to cultivate? The one who became a god is just my clone. To be able to do this, you are definitely not from this world. You don't have to worry about that for now. In any case, I saved your life in the void. You can travel in the void. Empress Stoneheart didn't dare to treat Li Qingshan as a native of the small world anymore. If she had this kind of power, she wouldn't have petrified in despair when the world was destroyed. However, how could an existence that could travel in the void have such a low cultivation level? This Li Qingshan seemed to have endless mysteries on him. Once again, thank you for saving my life. I can provide you with a set of cultivation technique. Moreover, it is one of the top cultivation techniques in my world. Oh, what is it? Records of the imperial supremacy of the world. Sounds good. Tell me more about it. Our world's #1 sect is called the Imperial Supremacy Temple. The records of the imperial supremacy of the world is the ultimate technique of the Imperial Supremacy Temple. When cultivated to the highest level, not only can one pass through 5 heavenly tribulations, but they can also reach the peak of 5 heavenly tribulations. That is why it is called the Imperial Supremacy. One of the top cultivation techniques in the world. Normally, it would surpass the power limit of the world. Because ascenders also had the chance to communicate with this world, there would be some stronger cultivation techniques. Moreover, in the long river of time, there would be all kinds of coincidences, such as the reincarnation of celestial beings. Li Qingshan remembered that the 3 graves in the 3 Graves 5 classics of the Great Xia dynasty should be a cultivation technique of this level. Perhaps it was slightly weaker, but within the same level, there would be no difference in essence. After all, Empress Stoneheart's world had developed for so many years, and it was one level higher than the 9 provinces. Could it be that it was also at this level? Is there anything better? For example, a cultivation technique that can pass through 6 heavenly tribulations. Emperor Stoneheart said, "My friend, don't be greedy. After 4 heavenly tribulations, you can form a yin spirit. After 5 heavenly tribulations, you can form a yang spirit just now. If you want to pass 6 heavenly tribulations, you need to combine yin and yang and form a primordial spirit. Then, you can be called a mortal deity. If you are a Buddhist, you have already achieved the avatar fruit and are only 1 level away from the arhat fruit. You will completely transcend the mortal world, and after death, you will no longer be born in the realm of desire. This level is not something we can understand." Li Qingshan remembered that the avatar fruit was the 3rd fruit of the 4 fruits of arhat. After 4 heavenly tribulations, you would be called the 1st fruit arhat, also known as the Sudra Huan fruit. Sudra Huan meant to enter the realm of immortality. If he were to compare it with the schools in his previous life, the refinement of qi could be regarded as a preschool. The 3 levels after that were elementary monk, middle monk, and high monk. Only after passing the 4th heavenly tribulation could one be regarded as a great monk. With a clear goal and direction, all the previous training could be said to be preparation for this step. As for the 2nd fruit, it was called Situ or Hamako. Taking it 1 step further, one could be considered a research monk. If one could attain the 3rd fruit, Anagami, that would be incredible. A dignified professorial monk would be looked up to wherever he went, much higher than a research monk. However, after reaching this step, you would be at the end of the road of learning. If you wanted to go further and become an academician, you would have to go through 7 heavenly tribulations and achieve the real arhat fruit. That was the real arhat, also known as the dragon-subduing arhat or the tiger-subduing arhat. From then on, you would enjoy a lifetime of honor, be recognized by Buddhism, and be on the same level as the saints. You would transcend the mortal world and enter the realm of holiness. Outside of Buddhism, the human immortal was equivalent to the 3rd fruit of Buddhism. You would reach another extreme on the road of cultivation and finally have the right to be called an immortal. However, if you wanted to get rid of the word human, you would have to go to another level. Once you reach that level, you would be listed as an immortal, shining as the sun and moon, and living as long as heaven and earth. The difference between immortal and mortal was like a chasm. After 6 heavenly tribulations, you would not become a butterfly, but you would become a cocoon. Normal cultivation methods would be isolated outside the cocoon. Cultivators would not be able to pry into it, and even if they saw it, they would not be able to understand it. Li Qingshan had the 9 transformations of demons and gods, so he was not worried about this at all. When he punched the 12 demon gods and kicked Little Ming's mother, he would not have to worry about not having a suitable human cultivation method. Alright, I'm thinking too much. But this extreme emperor scripture sounds like an orthodox Daoist method. Can it transform the demon heart? It can't at first, but later on, the extreme emperor temple turned into the devil and turned it into the extreme emperor records of world destruction, which pursued extreme destructive power. You can start cultivating from this method first, and then you can enter the Tao from the devil. Li Qingshan sighed in his heart. She was indeed the top figure of a world. Something that he thought would be very troublesome was actually so simple when she said it. This was probably because the cultivation path of that world had developed to the extreme. He was also a little curious. Since the Extreme Emperor Temple is the #1 sect in the world, why did it turn into the devil? Did it want to unify the world? How did this method end up in your hands? It would be great if the Extreme Emperor Temple only wanted to unify the world. Because the spiritual chi of heaven and earth was insufficient, the Extreme Emperor Temple allied with the 9 major sects and destroyed all the other sects and itinerant cultivators. During this period, the alliance was divided, and there were many battles. They wanted to attract the Azura Tao to descend, but the Azura Tao never descended. Later on, the 5 major sects joined forces to defeat the Extreme Emperor Temple, and this method spread. From then on, everyone understood that our world had been completely cut off from the 6 paths of reincarnation. Even if we gathered spiritual chi, it would be useless. At that time, methods were no longer valuable, and even mortals could come into contact with many. If you want, I can give you a few more methods that are not weaker than this. At this point, Empress Stoneheart's steady and calm state of mind trembled a little. Under the shadow of the apocalypse, the war lasted for thousands of years. More than half of the cultivators in the world died in battle, and 9 out of 10 mortals died. It was an indescribable tragedy. Everyone was filled with despair until the world collapsed and was destroyed. Because of this, her heart was filled with a strong desire to survive. Not just to live, but to live forever. To be continued. Chapter 1268. Li Qingshan said, "Then please pass these 2 cultivation methods to me, fellow." The complete cultivation method of the Imperial Polarities records of the world appeared in Empress Stoneheart's head. Li Qingshan skimmed through it slightly and discovered that it really was extremely wondrous. There were wondrous methods for governing the world, as well as boldness to embrace the world. The world felt like it was in his hand. It was much more brilliant than the current records of the fighting demon, but he didn't know how to turn from Tao into a demon. However, Empress Stoneheart remained silent. Li Qingshan understood what she meant and smiled. Wu Taizhan was collecting miscellaneous items by the beach to catch some fish to eat when a figure suddenly landed on the beach and walked toward his precious statue. "Who are you?" Wu Tieshan's body tensed up immediately. He gripped the hilt of his sword tightly like a leopard that was ready to pounce. He looked at the newcomer with an unfriendly expression. However, the newcomer's face looked familiar no matter how he looked at it. He suddenly opened his mouth wide. "Kai King. My lord." He had only seen this man once, and it was on his father Wu Huan's shoulder. Yet, it left an unforgettable impression on him. Li Qingshan smiled. "Tai Dan, long time no see. Although your mother is a good person, I'm really not your father." Wu Taizhan trembled in excitement. "You really? Didn't you leave?" "I never left." Li Qingshan patted his shoulder and made his way over to the statue. He tapped it gently with his index finger, and the spiritual chi of the world was drawn over, surging towards her from the tip of his finger, radiating with resplendent light. The stone-gray color gradually faded, revealing the fair skin. The hard rocks turned into soft clothes. The clothes danced with the sea breeze. Empress Stoneheart blinked. Her eyes were black and bright, but her gaze was still as stubborn as a rock. She forced herself to say, "Thank you, fellow Daoist." Then, she projected the records of the Extreme Emperor's world destruction into her heart. When Li Qingshan saw the records of the Extreme Emperor's world destruction, he knew that Empress Stoneheart didn't lie to him. This technique was filled with the determination to destroy everything. It was a true demonic technique that could transform a demonic heart and replace the fighting demon record. Comparing the 2 versions, he felt that it was even more amazing. He looked into Empress Stoneheart's eyes and said sincerely, "I hope you have fun in my world." In an instant. With Empress Stoneheart as the center, the laws of heaven and earth fluctuated. As the god of the world, Li Qingshan gave her blessings so that she would no longer be rejected by heaven's will and could walk freely in the world. Empress Stoneheart heaved a sigh of relief. His tone became more sincere. "Thank you. The reputation of the chivalrous king is well deserved." Even though his heart was as firm as a rock, he was just meat on someone else's chopping block. The other party practiced the cultivation method of demon folk too, so his temperament was unfathomable. It was truly unpredictable. Only now could he confirm the other party's goodwill. It was rare to feel such kindness in the post-apocalyptic world. "You're welcome. It's fate that brought us together." This was also his fortune, and he might become a great help in the future. On second thought, she was really too weak now. Although she had his blessing, it was hard to guarantee that nothing would happen to her. It was impossible for him to pay attention to her all the time. "I'll find another protector for you. Iron Egg, come here." Wu Taizhan was already stunned when he saw the statue turn into a woman and even communicate with the chivalrous king as an equal. Now that he heard the greeting, he clasped his hands in a hurry. "What do you need, chivalrous king?" Li Qingshan smiled. "You owe me your life. Wu Taizhan recalled what happened on the ship. He smiled too. I'll do anything for you. Li Qingshan said, protect her for a while for me. It shouldn't take too long. Wu Taizhan glanced at Empress Stoneheart and met her determined, cold eyes. His heart shuddered. He had no time to pay attention to her alluring beauty, so he lowered his head in a hurry. For some reason, he felt that the statue was more like a woman. I won't let you down. Li Qingshan nodded in satisfaction. He raised his hand and touched his forehead, and he vanished. Wu Taizhan felt like he had fallen into a stormy sea again. He felt dizzy for a while and realized that there was a new technique in his sea of consciousness. It was called the art of the boundless ocean. After comprehending it, he let out a cheer. Long live the chivalrous king. This technique was too suitable for him and the current environment. To be able to pass the second heavenly tribulation, what kind of realm was that? He turned around and saw Empress Stoneheart. A woman who could sit on the same level as the chivalrous king was definitely not a simple person. He coughed twice. Senior, please tell me what you need. Go ahead and cultivate. I'll call you when I need you. Empress Stoneheart found a rock, sat down cross-legged, and breathed in and out spiritual energy. A large part of her world had been digested by the small world. As the only survivor, she was not rejected by the spiritual energy, so it was only a matter of time before her cultivation recovered. However, once her cultivation reached the limit that this world could accommodate, she would be unable to ascend, nor would she be able to traverse through space. She would still be trapped in this world. By then, she would even have to ask Li Qingshan for help. This was the awkwardness of losing her own world. Li Qingshan's consciousness returned to the void. Deep Blue Little Fatty went through another 3 teleportations and easily traveled thousands of miles. Lightning flashed in the void. Luo Hu Xiaoming was going through the second heavenly tribulation. Ever since he had an endless supply of spiritual energy, the cultivation of the Azura Divine Sun had been improving at a tremendous pace. This was not only because of his bloodline, but also because he had already walked this path once. It was as easy as a doctoral student learning a middle school curriculum. He suddenly remembered that the reincarnated heavenly man should have grown rapidly after inheriting the memories of his previous life and becoming Lin Xian. However, it would probably be limited by the quality of the spiritual energy. After a while, Luo Hu Xiaoming came back with a relaxed expression as if he had gone out for a stroll. His body had grown a lot, and he had turned into a handsome young man who was 13 or 14 years old. His strength was comparable to that of a normal cultivator. If they were to fight, he would not be the one to die. However, his demand for the quality and quantity of spiritual energy was much higher than that of a normal cultivator. The quality of the spiritual energy in the small world is still too low. There are too many impurities. You don't need to supply it to me anymore. Wait until you return to the 9 states and go through the third heavenly tribulation. Li Qingshan also agreed. Cultivators had to ascend to a higher and bigger world to obtain a more suitable environment for cultivation. Right, I've just obtained 2 new cultivation techniques. Help me look at them. The Extreme King's Records of the World and the Extreme King's Records of World Destruction. They are a bit similar to the Path of the Great Lord of Freedom, but their levels are too far apart. The Great Lord of Freedom controls destruction and prosperity. Compared to him, these 2 cultivation techniques are a bit worse than death. However, from a mortal's point of view, they are quite good. They have reached the peak of mortals, and it is rare that they contain a hint of the great destruction intent. If I hadn't experienced the destruction of the world, I would not have been able to reach this level. Li Qingshan listened carefully and learned a lot. A god's knowledge was indeed extraordinary, but the key was the height they possessed. At this time, Jiyu Yangying also stopped cultivating. She also said that the spiritual energy in the small world was not very useful. It could be maintained, but it would be difficult for her to improve. Li Qingshan clapped his hands. All right, cultivation ends here. Let's set off immediately. Our final destination is the 9 states. Deep Blue's fat tail swayed, creating layers of ripples. It glided forward for tens of thousands of miles and suddenly disappeared into the void. To be continued. Chapter 1269. The grey haze passed through the sea of trees. Billions of leaves turned yellow and withered. When the wind blew, they danced in the sky like a heavy snowstorm, displaying its final splendor. The gaping mouth of a hungry ghost impatiently devoured the land of the 9 prefectures. The mushroom cloud that soared into the sky had yet to disperse when the left master's command was still echoing between heaven and earth. You must find her. Find her. Deep under the ground, in the crisscrossing underground maze, she walked with difficulty. One of her eyes was deep and ethereal, while the other was burning with bone fire. Her body was half alive and half dead, like a pillar that had been stripped of its vermilion color. Her bones were ferocious and full of cracks. A strange voice said, "Give up. You won't be able to survive this, my dear master." It was persuasive and full of twisted malice. The abandoned immortal sword would not be loyal to any master. She turned a deaf ear to it and walked forward, trying not to leave any traces. Even if you don't emit any aura and can hide underground, there are more than 20 bald donkeys. They are more than enough to search this land from top to bottom. How can you escape with your current appearance? Rumble. The aftermath of the explosion spread underground, triggering countless earthquakes. It might take years for it to completely disappear. The cave trembled. Rocks fell like rain, ready to collapse at any moment. Lava gushed out from the cracks, and the world seemed to be shaking. Even if you can escape, Li Qingshan will not come back. Shut up. Flames flashed in her eye sockets. The skull prayer beads tightly wrapped around the abandoned immortal sword and clashed. If you do that, you will definitely attract those bald donkeys. The abandoned immortal sword trembled slightly, but it could not break free from the claws of the skeleton demons. After all, it needed her power as the source. Moreover, it had been damaged in the fierce battle just now. She summoned the broken Bloodsea banner and wrapped the abandoned immortal sword in it. She said calmly, "If you come out, we will fight to the death." Then, the flames in her eye sockets dimmed, and she fell forward. The skeleton demons surrounded her and made strange noises, but they could not wake her up. Her injuries were too serious. The abandoned immortal sword fell into the blood sea. The sword light shone and trembled, knowing that she was in an unprecedented state of weakness. It was the best time to counterattack. More than 20 monk kings went underground. With the left imperial advisor as the core, they formed a great formation that covered 1,000 li. It was like a huge net. Each monk king was like a node, constantly shining with Buddhist light, not letting go of a single inch of land. They were rapidly approaching her. The corpse kings and ghost kings were also closing in. Every single one of them was filled with greed, wanting to use her life to exchange for the favor of the hungry ghost realm. Emperor Li had made a grave mistake, and he dared not stop them again. This was a hunt. Although there was a lot of risk involved, greed made them ignore everything. For a time, she was besieged both internally and externally, but she had lost all power to resist. All that was left was her obsession. The skeleton demons stopped screaming and carried her broken body towards the north. Before the monk kings could retract their nets, they had to get far away from the mouths of hungry ghosts. Within the sea of blood, the humming of the sword subsided. The forsaken immortal sword spirit had chosen to give up. If I go out and devour her now, wouldn't I be too stupid if I were to unfortunately fall into the hands of those bald donkeys? He was unwilling to admit that he deeply feared her. She had always been a monster that could strike fear into the living, the dead, or even all self-aware existences, which was why he was in such a hurry to destroy her. A while later, the monk kings returned to the surface and gathered beside the left imperial advisor. Imperial advisor, the enemy of Buddha has probably already left this region. The enemy of Buddha is skilled at hiding her aura, so it's truly difficult to find her. Should we ask the imperial astronomer to help us find her? The imperial astronomer was skilled at divining the heavenly secrets and investigating fate. The head of the imperial astronomer was the leader of the school of yin-yang. The enemy of Buddha is a monster that's neither alive nor dead. Capturing her through the heavenly secrets and fate probably won't be easy. Why don't we try? We can't just let her go like this. The monk kings discussed among themselves. The left imperial advisor listened in silence before suddenly asking, "Dauntless, do you have any clues?" The dauntless monk was stern. He said nothing the entire time. With that, he brought his palms together and bowed. "No, imperial advisor." Although he knew she was the enemy of Buddha, his grievances with the Chan monastery of Devarengia could not be explained in a few words. Coupled with how he was currently thinking about how to save the unraging monk, he really did not have any. However, if he really did have any clues, he definitely would not hide it. The left imperial advisor frowned. Right now, the imperial astronomer was dealing with something major, so it was impossible for them to split their attention to help him search for her. This matter was extremely important. Even the invasion of the hungry ghost realm had to wait, let alone a measly enemy of Buddha. As a result, he led the monk kings to expand the search area, searching in all directions. They expanded the search area to a radius of 10,000 kilometers, but they still found nothing. The left imperial advisor said, "The enemy of Buddha is heavily injured, so she must find a place to heal." "Who does she trust the most?" The dauntless monk said, "Li Qingshan." "Probably only Li Qingshan. It's that wretched demon who fought against the crown prince of Sai Qing, the unraging's good disciple." "Where is that wretched demon right now?" "I don't know." "You don't know?" "Ever since her battle against the king of Feathermen, Bai Chen, she vanished. Perhaps she's no longer in this world. I remember that the wretched demon and the enemy of Buddha have a dwelling in the Chain Mountains within the Rui commandery of the Green Province," the left imperial advisor said in thought. In order to hunt down and kill the enemy of Buddha, he had made sufficient preparations. However, that's only a small mountain. Its spiritual chi is weak, so it's been abandoned a long time ago. It's nowhere near enough to defend against her. The dauntless monk understood the geography of the Green Province. Let alone a small mountain, even the entire Chain Mountains were not a particularly good place for cultivation. In the past, all the famed mountains and great rivers had been occupied by sects of various sizes, which was why cultivators established dwellings there. Now that the Green Province had suffered repeated disasters, many mountains and rivers had been emptied out. It had been a long time since cultivators went there. And, it was not like she was an idiot. Instead, she was the cultivator with the greatest ability for comprehension he had ever seen, so why would she remain in such an obvious place? It was exactly because the left imperial advisor knew this that he did not rush off to the Chain Mountains immediately. The other monk kings also found it impossible. Perhaps the Banyan Tree King is protecting her, or maybe it's the city amongst the clouds. She might still be deep underground, hiding in the flames of the earth. The interference from the underground magnetic field is too great, so we can't find her. The left imperial advisor said, "The enemy of Buddha cannot tolerate all living beings. She won't believe these people, and it's even more impossible for her to remain deep underground in her current state." He made up his mind. "Let's go to the Chain Mountains. Home, wasn't it the safest place for people? It was the only place where they could find comfort after suffering all the pain in the outside world. Among the undulating mountains, this lonely little peak seemed so ordinary. However, the 3 words Qing Xiao's home on the stone wall retained an unforgettable memory. This was their home. Floating astronomy. Chapter 1270. Outside the commandery city of Rui, the headquarters of the Hawkwolf Guard. The eagle spread its wings on top of the white robe, and a silver eagle emblem hung on the waist. This was Jiyu Yangying's attire that never changed. It was also the uniform of one of the 3 pillars of the Rui commandery, the White Hawk commander. Jiyu Yangying had already left for a long time, and the imperial daughter Sai Bao had also been summoned back to the imperial court. The current successor was still a woman, the only disciple of Jiyu Yangying, the former White Wolf commander, and the current White Eagle commander, Qian Rongji. As she stood with her hands behind her back, she vaguely resembled Jiyu Yangying's bearing in the past, but her awe-inspiring presence completely surpassed Jiyu Yangying's. As she practiced the illustrations of the Naraka, the venomous snake Hell had gradually merged with her. He seemed more like a disciple of legalism. All the White Wolf guards were especially careful in front of her, even though she seemed even more magnanimous than Jiyu Yangying. She quietly guarded the communication circle, waiting for news from the south. A gorgeous little snake crawled up from her collar and slithered along her neck to her cheek, hissing and flicking its tongue. However, there was a second one, a third one. In the blink of an eye, her face, which could be considered beautiful, was filled with snakes that danced and tangled with each other, becoming extremely terrifying. The hissing sounds rising and falling in the darkness were even more chilling. The veins on her neck bulged. Hell's torture wasn't ordinary, but she didn't move at all. Only a pair of eyes could be seen on her face. They also turned into snake eyes that flickered faintly. They were even colder and more vicious than the snakes of hell. The door to the communication room suddenly opened, and a ray of sunlight shone in. The eagle token shone with a silvery luster. Her brows wrinkled, not her orders. No one could disturb him except for one person. A handsome man leaned against the door frame, his smile brighter than the sun. "Rongji, is there any news?" Qian Rongji turned around and faced Lin Xian with her terrifying face. "Commander Lin, please refer to me as Commander in the Hawkwolf Guard." Anyone who saw such a face would be startled. But Lin Xian's smile did not change. In fact, there was even a hint of gentleness and pity in it. "Cultivating like this is too tiring." Qian Rongji stared at him with a pair of snake eyes, as if trying to see through his sincerity. "But why are you so concerned about this little Anne?" Lin Xian asked curiously. All these years, she had been paying attention to the news of the enemy of Buddha through various channels, but there had never been any contact between them. Qian Rongji said, "It has nothing to do with you." At this moment, the communication array flashed. Qian Rongji turned around and silently accepted the information. "The Banyan Tree King has failed to attack the tower, the Gate of Hungry Ghosts has expanded further, and the Dark Queen has been captured." Her expression suddenly changed. The left Imperial Preceptor and the Monk Kings had successfully ambushed the enemy of Buddha. The enemy of Buddha retreated with heavy injuries and his whereabouts were unknown. She thought for a moment and suddenly turned to walk out of the door, brushing past Lin Xian. "Don't follow me." Lin Xian stopped in his tracks. As he watched her disappear into the horizon, his smile was still bright and beautiful, but it was filled with helplessness. A few White Wolf guards passing by teased him, "Commander, aren't you going to chase after her?" He waved his hand, "Go away, or I'll send you south to attack the Gate of Hungry Ghosts." The White Wolf guards walked away with a smile. They were clearly not afraid of this friendly White Wolf commander. He walked towards the communication array and his eyes turned cold. "This damned woman. After so many years, she's still wary of me. Does she know I'm Chu Tian? No, that's impossible. Otherwise, she would have done it a long time ago. Since I can't outsmart her, I can only fight her with force. It's a pity that her cultivation improves extremely quickly. She basically cultivates without a care for her life. Coupled with the heaven climbing vine and my heaven climbing vine, if this continues, it's very likely that she'll undergo the third heavenly tribulation before me." Arriving before the communication array, he also accepted the information and thought, "I've never seen her show such an expression. Just what is her relationship with the enemy of Buddha? Whatever, I have to retrieve the heaven climbing vine as soon as possible. There's not much time left. I can't care even if I make a fool of myself." Qian Rongji first flew northwest before turning south. She turned into a snake-like streak of light and landed in the Chain Mountains, in front of Qing Xiao's dwelling. She silently thought, could she be here? It can't be. How could she be so stupid? She turned around and turned into a snake-like streak of light, passing through the array and arriving in front of the mountain gate. An unmanned array like this could no longer stop her. This seemed to prove that there was no one in this dwelling. She also did not sense the existence of any aura. She pushed open the stone door and walked into the dwelling. At the bottom of the mountain burned an almost transparent white flame, like a blooming lotus. Little Anne lay quietly in the lotus, her face was also pale to the point of almost being transparent. All the skeleton demons were surrounding her below, spitting out Samdi white bone fire to heal her. The ground was filled with huge and ferocious white bones. There were less than 10 skeleton demons left. After exhausting the Samdi white bone fire, they turned into a pile of dry bones. She's really here. Qian Rongji opened her eyes wide in disbelief and joy. She seems to have lost consciousness. No wonder, it seems like these skeleton demons sent her here because of her instincts. At this time, the skeleton demons all looked at Qian Rongji. Qian Rongji immediately felt a great sense of crisis. Even though the skeleton demons had become very weak, they were still not something a mere Azoth core cultivator could deal with. Qian Rongji called out, "Little Anne, wake up, it's too dangerous here, you can't stay here." Little Anne seemed to have fallen into a deep sleep, not responding at all. Qian Rongji took a deep breath, stepped forward, and slowly descended until she landed at the bottom of the mountain. The skeleton demons' heads turned along with her body, their joints collided, making a cracking sound, raising their huge bone claws. But they did not immediately attack, either because they did not receive Little Anne's order, or because they did not feel any hostility. Qian Rongji passed through the skeletons, walking towards the White Lotus. The skeleton demons were like wild beasts that felt threatened, withdrawing the samdi flame of white bone, preparing to deal with the enemy in front of them. Little Anne slowly landed on the stone platform, still in a deep sleep. Qian Rongji stopped. The road ahead was blocked by the skeleton demons' huge bodies, their sharp teeth collided, making a cracking sound, not a strange laugh, but a final warning. She clearly felt that if she took another step forward, these ferocious skeleton demons would immediately attack. She suddenly smiled contemptuously. "You've been tricked." A gorgeous little snake came out of the stone platform, biting Little Anne's slender wrist. The skeleton demons roared angrily, their bone claws tore through the air, grabbing at her together. She simply closed her eyes. Every skeleton demon had the strength of a demon king. At this moment, attacking at the same time, it was like a thunderbolt, impossible to dodge. She thought calmly, "It's said that if you die in that white flame, even your soul will be burned, unable to enter reincarnation. But this is also good, let's end it here." Suddenly, she thought of Lin Xian's smiling face all these years. What exactly did you do? Chapter 1271. More than 20 beams of golden light streaked across the sky and stopped in the sky above the Lianyu Mountains. Master of the Left looked down at the undulating mountain range. His eyes focused as he looked past the 8 gates array of golden locks and locked onto the 3 words Qing Xiao's family. "Fearless, is this the cave abode of the foe and the demon?" The dauntless monk said, reporting to the imperial preceptor, "I don't know. Perhaps he is. Fellow Taoists, please lend me a hand." The left master slowly raised his wooden fish hammer. The monk kings put their palms together and chanted the name of Buddha. The golden light gathered on the body of the left master and condensed on the wooden fish hammer. It was even brighter and more dazzling than the sun. As fellow Buddhist cultivators, even though they belonged to different sects, they were still of the same breath and branches. Based on this point alone, it was far more powerful than the combined forces of more than 20 great cultivators. Moreover, with the left imperial preceptor, a top-notch powerhouse of the present age, overseeing the situation, he could easily utilize this frightening power. Even if Little Anne was in his best condition, it would still be difficult for him to face it head-on, let alone now that he was heavily injured. Amitabha. The left imperial preceptor gathered enough strength before he threw the wooden fish hammer down with all his might. In an instant, it was as if the sun had fallen on the mountains. Wherever the light shone, the forest would be set ablaze. It was 100 times more violent than the sneak attack on Little Anne. The 8 gates formation of golden locks shattered like a thin piece of paper. The sun set on the lonely peak, and the 3 words Qing Xiao's home melted in the golden light. Boom! Tens of thousands of golden lights illuminated the world, and the surrounding dozen or so mountain peaks collapsed in an instant. Countless mountain peaks collapsed, and the entire chain mountain range was turned into a mess, burning with raging flames. The golden light dissipated, and the sky turned blue. Qing Xiao's abode had already disappeared from this world. Not a single trace was left. Perhaps there was nothing that could not be erased. Regardless of whether it was a mountain or a memory, it would always gradually fade with the passage of time until it was as if it had never existed. What is home? State Preceptor, it seems like the enemy Buddha isn't here. Amitabha. In this old monk's opinion, No matter where the enemy of Buddha is recuperating, it won't be here. The monk kings discussed among themselves. Even though they respected the left imperial preceptor. But everyone was in the same realm. Buddhism also emphasized the equality of all living beings, so it was not to the extent of not daring to speak. The left imperial advisor's expression was as calm as still water. He had gone through so much trouble, but it was all for naught. His expression didn't look too good. In the burning Lian Yu mountain range, countless birds and beasts were burned to death. There seemed to be a few other households. He let out a long sigh. Ari, forget it. This faux Buddha is vicious and cunning. He is indeed a great enemy of Buddhism. If he couldn't kill her today, he would definitely torture the common people. He could only wait for the future to come. It was a pity that the living beings in the mountain were implicated by the enemy of Buddha for no reason. Wu Wei, just stay behind and recite the Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva original wish sutra to help them transcend. Imperial tutor, my junior brother, don't forget who you are. The left imperial advisor warned, putting on an imposing manner. The dauntless monk knew the imperial advisor of the left was in an extremely horrible mood. Speaking up for the unraging monk right now would only anger him. He was not a good-tempered person either. His mood was also extremely bad. He kept a cold face and did not say a word. The left imperial preceptor snorted coldly, flicked his sleeves, and left. The other monk kings followed closely behind. Then he glanced back at the burning Chain Mountains. This Dauntless is the sect master of the Chan Monastery of Deva-Nga. She has no sense of propriety or the bigger picture. The school of Zen really is close to the evil path. Though, after heavily injuring the faux Buddha this time, she probably won't be bold enough to cause any more trouble. It won't be too late to deal with her once we're done with that. The dauntless monk gazed at the burning mountains with a frown. He did not even recite the Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva original wish sutra, directly returning to the monastery. A while ago. The sharp bone claws stabbed into Qian Rongji's cheek before suddenly stopping and slowly pulling back. Qian Rongji opened her eyes. Through the gaps between the jagged bones, she saw that little and had opened her eyes before she knew it, currently staring at her with her clear eyes. She could not help but shiver inside. She smiled, but it was also rather bitter for some reason. Pain clears people up, right? Little Anne raised her arm and looked at the 4 marks on her wrist, nodding seriously. With a wave of her hand, the skeleton demon turned back into prayer beads and returned to her wrist, except it had become very sparse. With another wave of her hand, the huge pile of bones on the ground all turned into samdi flames of white bone again, which she sucked into her mouth. Looking inside herself, her white bones were covered in cracks. The wounds would not heal so easily, but at least she seemed much better on the surface. She extended her hand into the Bloodsea banner and grabbed the hilt of the Forsaken Immortal sword before grabbing Qian Rongji's hand and fleeing underground. Soil and rock flashed past quickly. Qian Rongji's mind was in turmoil as she stared at her back. Something seemed to fill her chest, yet it was also empty. At this moment, a great rumble rang out underground, and the ground shook. Little Anne stopped and raised her head. She seemed to see the destruction of Qing Xiao's dwelling. She clenched her fists. A while later, she lowered her head. Thank you. Your injuries, are you all right? Qian Rongji seemed to have lost her usual glib tongue. Sometimes, sincerity was more difficult than lies. Little Anne shook her head lightly and sat down on a rock. Though she was still expressionless, she seemed tired and lonely. Qian Rongji was instantly at a loss, not knowing what to say. After some thought, she sat down on the ground next to her. Suddenly, she extended her hand in front of her. A dark green vine grew out of her palm. The strong branches extended into the air, extending to some unknown place. Little Anne's eyes were also attracted by this wondrous plant. He asked, "You got this from Chu Tian?" Qian Rongji smiled. "You still remember Chu Tian? He's still alive. He's called Lin Xian now." Little Anne's calm words were like a bolt of lightning striking Qian Rongji's heart. She muttered, "So that's how it is, so that's how it is. Why didn't you tell me before? Qingshan didn't let me." Little An pursed her lips and revealed a rare human-like expression. Therefore, Qian Rongji couldn't blame her for hiding it in the past at all. Okay, then why are you saying it now? He didn't think that she had the concept of gratitude. Even if she did, she probably wouldn't go against Li Qingshan's wishes for such a small matter. I'm going to do something that Qingshan doesn't want me to do. Little An's expression was a bit gloomy as he looked at the ground. I don't know if he will forgive me. Is this all for him? Yes. Then he will definitely forgive you. Really? It's true. Thank you. I'm leaving now. Little An's gratitude was more sincere. What about you? I want to stay a little longer. Yes. Little An left, leaving Qian Rongji muttering to herself, Chu Tian, Lin Xian, Chu Tian, Lin Xian. A smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. The smile gradually widened into a chuckle. Then it turned into a mournful laugh. Finally, it turned into a hysterical laugh. The snakes all over her body danced wildly, enjoying the taste of pain as they drowned her. Floating astronomy. Chapter 1272. The silver moonlight shone on the golden wheat field. Fireflies flashed by the pond, reflected on the black water, as if they were shining with the stars. A white figure suddenly slid across the black water surface. It was so quiet that it was like a ghost. Even the fireflies were not disturbed by it. She walked through the wheat field in midsummer. The air was filled with the smell of harvest. They did not understand the war of cultivators. As long as they could survive, mortals would live their own lives year after year. The pale and slender hand drew across the sharp wheat light. She kept her head up, her ethereal eyes looking at the sky, as if she wanted to count the number of stars, and as if she was looking for an answer. Whoosh! A refreshing summer wind blew. The wheat waves undulated, and her seaweed-like long hair floated behind her. The sparks were far away in the sky. There was no answer. So she looked at the village in the distance. The golden wheat light pierced her fingertip, and a drop of blood fell, turning into a pale spark that fell on the wheat field, spreading silently. In the blink of an eye, the undulating wheat waves turned into a sea of fire. The wheat field did not burn, but it lost its color and became pale. There was no longer any vitality, and it returned to absolute silence. The white flame passed through the pond, and the fireflies also dimmed. They fell into the black water, creating ripples. The fire was ignited. Like a fierce night wind, it spread over the mountains, crossed the rivers, and passed through the villages and cities. In the quiet village, a sleeping child was having a sweet dream. He pursed his lips and turned over. The pale flame touched his forehead, and he merged into the fire. In the old town, the dying old man endured the torment of his illness. He could not sleep, and he longed for the continuation of his life. The pale flame reflected in his turbid eyes. The pain soon disappeared, and he became a light flame together with his life. In the sturdy city, the brothel was having a merry night. The lights were bright, and the music was played. The drunkard scolded and laughed tirelessly. The beggar outside the door looked at the rich guests coming in and out. He wanted to go forward but did not dare. He wanted to retreat but did not want to. He dodged between the lights. Unknowingly, he spent his life. The pale flame flowed in and out. The lights were still bright, and the laughter was still in his ears, but the music had ended. In the pale wheat field, she twisted her waist, causing her clothes to flutter in the wind. Her footsteps were light, and her hand gestures changed. She controlled the prairie fire, as if she was dancing to her heart's content. Only the stars were facing each other. Men and women, wise and foolish, kind and evil, rich and poor, hopeless and hopeful, painful and joyous. All of these things had once been like the difference between clouds and mud, but now they were all equal in this dance. However, all living beings were not equal. Even in the face of death, there would always be cultivators who were unwilling to accept their fate. They wanted to surpass all living beings, occupying famed mountains and blessed lands, laying down great formations to stabilize the mountain gates. Not even the pale white flames could invade. Standing under the silver moonlight, she turned around and raised her arms. The bell trembled, her black hair fluttered, and her prayer beads scattered. She disappeared into the mountains. With a thought, the sword-light soared, twisting and turning before disappearing into the void. Thus, the mountain gate was broken, the great battle formation was destroyed, and all living beings were wiped out. When the sun rose from the east, there were no longer any living beings within a radius of 1,000 miles, whether it was the tiniest insect or the strongest cultivator. In the faraway village, there was no smoke rising from the chimneys, and there were no cries of chickens or barks of dogs. The cities further away became empty. Everything maintained its original appearance, as if nothing had ever happened. The stars faded, the dance stopped, and the flames receded. The cracks in her white bones healed inch by inch. She raised her wrist, and a prayer bead appeared on it. The path of white bone and great beauty showed faint signs of breaking through again. This was the first time she had put the path of white bone and great beauty's purpose into practice, as well as the first vow, the vow to kill all living beings. It was as if she had been freed from invisible shackles. The effects were unexpectedly good. The ocean did not care about the small streams, which was why it was so deep. It was just like how while the flesh, blood, and souls of mortals could not compare to those of cultivators, they were much more numerous, making it much easier to kill them. There were also soul essences in plants. Every bit was insignificant, but they could be turned into sparks that could ignite a prairie fire. Perhaps this was the true path of white bone. In the azure sky, a black dragon warship flew across the horizon. The governor of Yong looked down at the barren land of 500 kilometers below. He had been in disbelief when he received the news, but he had no choice but to believe it now. He gritted his teeth and said, "Foe of Buddha." The honorable guests behind him fell silent. They could not believe that a cultivator could do something like this. This was no longer a massacre, but a complete annihilation. In the past, the soaring locust king had also turned the green province upside down, devouring countless living beings. However, that was after a very long time of preparation, and the swarm had snowballed. Even after the swarm had grown to a certain size, it was impossible for it to turn 500 kilometers into barren land in a single night. The soaring locust king did not dare to show himself easily. Great cultivators could kill millions of locusts with a raise of their hands. No matter how severe the disaster was, it was very difficult for it to threaten them. Regular cultivators could protect themselves. However, at this moment, even they felt deeply threatened. An honorable great cultivator said hesitantly, "Your Majesty, I heard that the left imperial advisor and 20 monk kings failed to kill the foe of Buddha even after ambushing her. As the governor of Yong, how can I ignore this? Look, she's right there. Fellow Taoists, prepare to attack. I heard that she seems to be injured. This might be a chance, the only chance." She gazed at the black ship in the distance. Just when she was about to move, a tender, green sprout grew, turning into a banyan tree. The branches swayed, and the leaves rustled. The great banyan tree king's sorrowful face appeared on the tree trunk. "Stop. Little Anne, I beg of you, you're making an enemy of the world." Even with his unprecedented extrapolation, he had still underestimated her terror. This flame was practically born for annihilation, destroying all living and dead alike. The threat she posed to this world was no less than that of the hungry ghost realm or the demonic domain. In fact, she was even more direct and fatal. This was the path of white bone and great beauty. The Samdi flames of white bone burned through the 3,000 worlds. In the past, it was only because of Li Qingshan's existence that the white bone bodhisattva's influence was greatly offset, so she had never used its power like this. Making an enemy? She narrowed her eyes slightly and swung Buddha slaying. The great tree toppled, burning and withering. The world shook gently, as if a soundless restraint had been ripped apart. As a result, she no longer had any qualms. In towering city of the Mist province, a gash over 300 meters long suddenly appeared on the great banyan tree. Tree sap flowed out like blood. Even though he was half a god of the world, possessing the power of the world, he was unable to heal this wound. This was a sword that even demon god Cheongchi had to be wary of. By the time the Black Dragon King, the lord of the Yong province, arrived, she had already vanished. The honorable great cultivators all let out sighs of relief. The Lord of Yong Province said sternly, "Let's ask for reinforcements from the Dragon Province." Chapter 1273. Just when the governor of the Yong Province sent a request for reinforcements to the Dragon Province, his face suddenly changed. He used a technique to peer into the atmosphere and saw that the morale of the people in the eastern part of the Yong Province was rapidly plummeting. Even disasters like droughts, floods, and plagues would not be so intense. "She's in the east. Your Majesty, what should we do?" The governor of Yongju pondered for a long time before letting out a long sigh. "Let's wait for reinforcements." Even if he rushed over now, he would not be able to stop her. It was impossible to lock onto the aura of such an enemy, nor was it possible to divine his location. Moreover, his strength was on par with or even beyond the 10 demon kings. It was simply unimaginable. She couldn't help but blame the left imperial preceptor for failing to kill her despite having such a good opportunity. He was really too useless. Then report to the Dragon Province. If this continues, there won't be anyone left on the Harmony Province before long. In the Lingua Temple of the Dragon Province, the imperial advisor of the left was livid. He said nothing. The monk kings were all incomparably shocked. They had thought that she would be wary after heavily injuring the enemy of Buddha, and that she would need to hide for a period of time to recuperate. They didn't expect the backlash to come so quickly. Perhaps she didn't even know what fear was. Amidst the solemn atmosphere, a young monk with delicate features stood up and said, "Imperial Preceptor, please head to Yongju immediately to provide assistance." He was the abbot of Qiushan Temple, which was located in Yongju and was the largest temple in Yongju. The left imperial preceptor waved his hand. "There's no need to say more. The time isn't right yet. This enemy Buddha's various techniques are not to be underestimated. She also has the Forsaken Immortal Sword left behind by the 5 Absolutes Immortal. Unless there's an extremely good opportunity, it will be extremely difficult to kill her. Only if Great Shia gathered all its strength would they have a chance of winning. But it was impossible now. That was why he pushed the rescue to the Lingua Temple. Then this penniless monk shall take his leave." Abbot Qiushan put his palms together, bowed, and turned to leave. "It's useless for you to go back. You might even lose your life," the left imperial preceptor said in a low voice. Now that a great change was imminent, he didn't summon the monk kings from all over just to deal with the enemy of Buddha. Abbot Qiushan was a rare talent in Buddhism. He had gone through 3 heavenly tribulations in less than 300 years. He had a bright future ahead of him. Abbot Qiushan said, "My Qiushan temple has been worshipped by the people of Yongju for 10,000 years. I am the abbot. How can we abandon it?" The left imperial advisor scolded, "Idiot. Narrow-minded." Abbot Qiushan had already left the courtyard, flying through the air. The other monk kings looked at each other. Many of them didn't agree with the left master. The enemy of Buddha was a great enemy of Buddhism. Even if he didn't have enough power and the chances weren't high, he had to go all out. For the sake of the world, how could she be allowed to slaughter the common people so wantonly? The left imperial preceptor's anger intensified as he flipped his right hand. He held on to the wooden fish and swung it lightly. The unraging monk tumbled to the ground, already heavily restrained by the formations, immobilized. He glared at the imperial advisor of the left. The left master threw a communication jade charm at his face. "Calm anger, look at what you've done. If it weren't for you, I would have killed the enemy of Buddha and saved countless lives." The unraging monk felt the restraints loosen slightly. He accepted the jade talisman and received the message, which also left him shocked. He said in pity, "Little Anne, oh little Anne, do you really want to be so obstinate?" The left imperial advisor asked, "Do you know your crime? It is the imperial preceptor's fault." The left imperial advisor laughed from extreme anger. "You've really fallen too deeply into the demonic path." The unraging monk said furiously, "If the enemy of Buddha is here, I'm willing to perish with her and save the common people." However, if the imperial advisor had attacked and destroyed the ghost tower earlier instead of acting like a despicable person and launching a sneak attack, would it have come to this? Despicable person. What a despicable person. You don't understand the bigger picture. You don't understand the bigger picture. Do you think you can perish with the enemy of Buddha just because you're dead? The hungry ghost realm wants her. If she doesn't die, the hungry ghost realm will never give up. I've been reading Buddhist scriptures ever since. I've only heard about the Buddha cutting off his flesh to feed eagles and feeding tigers with his body. I've never heard about the Buddha setting up ambushes and hunting eagles and tigers. I've never learned about the bigger picture or the bigger picture either. As the imperial advisor, you should have set an example and let the Buddhists of the world understand the spirit of Buddhism instead of scheming and calculating, only considering the pros and cons. My death might be useless, but there are still countless fellow disciples, arhats and bodhisattvas. The hungry ghost realm might not give up, but even if the 9 provinces perish, there are still the 3,000 worlds and the 6 paths of Sasra. Even if there are countless disasters, as long as the Buddhist Dharma is not twisted, the eternal lamp can never be extinguished and illuminate all life. The true enemy of Buddha is not in the outside world, but in our hearts. The unraging monk was heavily restrained, but a grand aura filled the hall right now. There would always be some fools who firmly believed in the principles in the books, refusing to turn back even if they ran into the world and bled. Even if they sullied themselves with alcohol and meat and stood against demon folk, it would not extinguish their will. Shut up. Why, you're an evil demon who distorts the Buddhist Dharma. What do you understand about the spirit of Buddhism? I don't understand, but if the Buddha is like the imperial advisor, launching sneak attacks and setting up ambushes, I'm willing to run into the Buddha statue and die. I'll strip you of your identity as the monk king right now. Drag me away and punish me with 3,000 strikes. The sun set and dusk. A short day passed by, followed by another long night. Fellow cultivators, reinforcements from the Dragon Province won't be coming. If we want to deal with the enemy of Buddha, we can only rely on ourselves. As the governor of the Yong Province, I have the responsibility to protect my territory. We must fight. If anyone doesn't want to take this risk, feel free to leave. I won't force you to stay. The governor of the Yong Province said to the dignitaries sternly. Behind him stood the abbot Cho Shan. None of the dignitaries said anything about retreating. They were all born and raised in the Yong Province. Even though they were extremely distant from mortals, if all the mortals died, where would there be cultivators? The legacies of their sects would be severed too. Please give us your orders, Your Majesty. The governor of the Yong Province took out the mental map of the Yong Province. This is all we can do, deep in the night. The great cultivators of the dignitaries were scattered in the sky above the Yong Province. They formed groups of 2 to 3 people and monitored the entire province. Once they discovered the enemy of Buddha, they would not be in a hurry to strike. Instead, they would send out messages and gather people so that they could deal a fatal blow to the enemy of Buddha. The governor of the Yong Province stood on the platform of the Black Dragon King to observe the aura and control the overall situation. Fortunately, the Yong Province was slightly smaller than the Green Province. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for them to monitor everything if it was as large as the Frost Province or the Mist Province. However, the Mist Province was the Banyan Tree King's home base. The Frost Province was frigid and sparsely populated, so she had never made it her first choice. Your Majesty, there's fire in the east. The governor of the Yong Province received the news and immediately gazed towards the east. Sure enough, the morale of the people had declined. Is it still in the east? Right when he was about to gather the dignitaries and set off for the east, another piece of news arrived. Your Majesty, there's fire in the northwest too. There's fire in the south too. For a moment, the Samdi flames of white bone lit up everywhere in the Yong Province. Having recovered their strength, the skeleton demons leapt about on the plains as they cackled. They were like kindling that set the forests and towns alight. The governor of the Yong Province hesitated, attempting to determine the true location of the enemy of Buddha through aura observation. The abbot, who had remained silent the entire time, suddenly said, Your Majesty, I sense that the formation around Mound Hill Temple has been breached. The enemy of Buddha is in Mound Hill Temple. How is that possible? Even the Black Dragon King struggles to get through the Heavenly King's earth-blanketing formation of Mound Hill Temple. I don't know. The enemy is in Mound Hill Temple. Please send reinforcements immediately. Oh no, the enemy of Buddha wants to open the demon cavern and draw demon folk in. Chapter 1274. Mound Hill Temple's status in the Harmony Province was equivalent to the Chan Monastery of Devarengye in the Green Province. It was even much more ancient than the Chan Monastery of Devarengye. It was a standard 10,000-year-old monastery. There were many pagodas and palaces in the temple, built on a rolling hill. The so-called Mount Bhikkhu was naturally not as simple as turning a hill upside down, but referring to the Mount of Bhikkhu. The Heavenly King of the Heavenly King covers the earth formation was referring to the Jtarastra of the East, a renowned guardian general of the Buddhist League. As such, this formation was naturally indestructible. Tonight, in order to deal with the enemy of Buddha, all the monk kings in the temple had come out, so no one was worried about a sneak attack here. Little An climbed to the top of the mountain and looked down at the hill temple that was illuminated by the Buddha's light. He gripped the celestial abandoned sword tightly and leaped down. He became one with the sword in the air and turned into a curved sword gleam that pierced into Mound Hill Temple. There were very few spells in this world that could block the sharpness of the abandoned immortal sword. No matter how strong the spell was, it was as easy as a needle piercing through cowhide. However, if he were to enter, he would only be placing himself in danger. It would not be easy to destroy this formation from the inside. Once the controller of the formation returned, he would immediately fall into a dangerous situation. As a result, no matter how much the soaring Locust King resented the Chan Monastery of Devarengye, he had never launched an attack against Great Buddha Mountain. A beam of golden light leaped across the horizon. Abbot Choshan rushed over at full speed. He had already started activating the formation from afar. At the same time, he sent a telepathic message to all the Shongqing cultivators: the enemy is at Choshan Temple. Please come to our rescue. All of a sudden, the alarm bells in the temple rang, and the projection of the Jtarastra appeared indistinctly. He had a dignified face and was holding a peeper. Gazing at the sword light, the peeper rang. The sword light froze, but the abandoned immortal sword was not so easily restrained. It wriggled like a fish and shot toward the foot of the Heavenly King's illusion. That was the core of the formation. It was also the largest hill in the temple, and on top of it sat the Hall of Great Strength. Is the enemy of Buddha walking into a trap? Abbot Choshan was surprised and delighted. However, when he saw the curved sword gleam disappear into the hill, he suddenly understood. Not good. The enemy of the Buddha wants to open the demon cavern and draw demon folk in. The Mound Hill Temple had another similarity to the Chan Monastery of Devarengye. It also suppressed a huge demon cavern, right below the Grand Hall. Suddenly, the hill shook violently. It was as if a giant beast was about to turn over. All the wells on the mountain were boiling. Dozens of streams of black demonic chi gushed out of the well. The forsaken immortal sword's soul said, "How ironic. At that time, you tried everything to stop me from opening the demon's den, but you are indeed the master I am most satisfied with, aside from your swordsmanship being slightly lacking. He isn't any weaker than that Wujua old ghost, and the things he does are much more interesting." Back then, it was the forsaken immortal sword that had broken the seal and opened the demonic den in Qingju. Little An didn't say anything. He waved his sword again, and a third of the thousands of intertwining iron chains broke. More devil chi gushed out. "Foe Buddha, stop." Abbot Choshan's angry roar rushed into the darkness of the hill, like the roar of millions of lions. The restless devils in the devil's den were shocked. The chaotic soul bell on Little An's waist rang, and the sound of the bell disrupted the lion's roar. With another slash, the iron chains broke, and the devil's den opened. The surging devil chi immediately pushed away the lion's roar, and broke through the layers of Buddhist light and rocks. The hill suddenly swelled up, and cracks of various sizes appeared on it as it trembled violently. Other than the Hall of Great Strength at the highest point, all the other buildings collapsed. Devil chi gushed out of the cracks and soared into the sky, drowning the Hall of Great Strength and the entire Choshan Temple. Jatarastra's figure also became unstable. After all, he wasn't the real heavenly guardian, but a phantom formed by a formation. From the moment she entered the Choshan temple to the moment she broke through the devil's den, it had only been a breath's time. She had only used 3 slashes. And this was under the suppression of the heavenly king covers the earth formation. Otherwise, 1 slash would have been enough. During the battle on Great Buddha Mountain, the Forsaken Immortal Sword still didn't have a master, and it relied on Elder Shetian to obtain its power. Now, it had a sword master who could definitely be regarded as powerful, and he had completely comprehended the sword concealment of heaven and earth, so his destructive power was even more terrifying. There was panic in the Mound Hill Temple. The golden light fell from the sky and landed heavily in front of the Mahavira Hall. The hill shook, and the rolling devil chi dissipated. Even the shadow of the heavenly king became solid. As if they had seen their savior, the monks cried out, "Abbot!" However, the abbot felt like he was standing in the mouth of a volcano that could erupt at any time. With the slightest distraction, the devil chi would erupt, and the entire Choshan temple would be reduced to demonic soil. The formation would be ripped apart too. He chanted the 6-syllable mantra of great clarity, Mani Mani Padme Hum, merciful Buddha, purge diamonds. The towering Buddha sitting in the Mahavira Hall slowly stood up, and the smooth marble floor under his feet immediately cracked and sank. His whole body glowed with layers of Buddha's light, and a halo appeared behind his head, making him look majestic. The statues and golden arhats in the surroundings all began to move as well. Immediately, it was like a kingdom of Buddhism had descended. What the Chan monastery of Devarengye possessed, Choshan temple obviously possessed as well, and they would only be stronger, not weaker. The Buddha had condensed the power of belief over 10 millennia, so his strength far surpassed regular great cultivators. He had once put little and in danger. If it were not for Li Qingshan's assistance in the nick of time, he would basically be in danger of dying. The heritage of a major Buddhist sect could not be trifled with. You've come at the perfect time. I'll use the formation to trap you here, and then I'll destroy you with the Buddha. Enemy of the Buddha, I'd like to see where you run off to now. As the abbot pondered, the Buddha suddenly paused. He could vaguely hear the sound of something shattering, which made him feel deeply uneasy. On the back of the Buddha slaying sword stabbed deeply into the golden body. The pale white hand gripped the shiny hilt, slowly turning the blade. Cracks rapidly spread out. In the blink of an eye, cracks crawled up the Buddha's plump face, covering the entire golden body. The Buddhist light dimmed and subsided, and he became a regular statue again. He slowly collapsed, scattering across the ground in the hall of great strength. The abbot's shocked and furious eyes met a pair of ethereal eyes. They flickered with Buddhist light, as well as some comprehension. Slay the enemy of Buddha, the abbot bellowed furiously, and the bell rang out again, nullifying each other. Several dozen golden arhats and bodhisattvas lunged towards her together. Every single one of them possessed the strength of a great cultivator. She had already scattered all of the skeleton demons, and the Bloodsea banner was useless too. Even with the Buddha slaying abandonment's twin swords, she struggled to fend off such a combined attack. Boom! The hall of great strength shook violently, and the shattered golden body of the Buddha shot through the air. A streak of light made a turn and flew over the abbot's head, leaving the hall of great strength and heading towards another hill. The abbot could tell with a single glance that it was the forest of pagodas in the temple. He could not help but become enraged. How dare you, enemy of Buddha! The golden arhats and bodhisattvas both burst through the walls in pursuit. The hall of great strength trembled even more. Drifting astronomy. Chapter 1275. The moonlight was like water, and the shadows of the trees danced. Little and stood in the forest of pagodas. To her, this was the largest treasury in the entire Yongju. Though the return of the head abbot Qiu Shan had caused some trouble, it was still within their expectations. It was better to say that it was a good thing. In the words of the Green Mountain, it was revenge. Of course, she did not have such feelings at all. She did not even feel the slightest bit of hatred towards the left advisor who had ambushed her. Everything was as it should be. Nothing had ever been as it should be. There was no need to be conflicted between Buddhism and the demonic, nor was there a need to consider what was right or wrong. In the words of the Path of White Bone and Great Beauty, it was a vow of endless worries. But did this mean that there were no more troubles? Whoosh! A large golden sword slashed towards her from behind, but she did not even turn her head as she swung the Buddha slaying sword. Clang! The blades crossed, and the Buddha slaying sword cut deeply into the golden sword. The Bodhisattva statue holding the sword immediately lost its luster and collapsed to the ground. Even the weapon in its hand could not withstand the Buddha slaying sword. At this time, more than 10 golden statues surrounded him again. The sword light flashed and drew a zigzag trajectory in the air. 3 heads flew into the air. She became one with her sword and broke out of the encirclement. She conveniently cut open a stupa and took out the relic within. Holding it in her palm, it immediately ignited and turned into the samdi flame of white bone. Boom! The stupa in front of her was smashed into pieces. An enraged tiger subduing golden body Luohan reached out its arms to grab her. Behind her, a gust of wind rose again, attacking her from both front and back. She threw herself into the arms of the golden body of the crouching tiger Arhat, the Buddha slaying sword in her left hand slightly retracted. The golden body of tiger subduing Luohan had a sword mark on its palm. It immediately stopped. She smashed the tiger vanquishing Arhat golden body into pieces. She threw out the abandoned immortal sword with her right hand. The sword light was like a wandering evil dragon. It flew around her body and pierced through the golden statues. Kill Buddha and defend, immortal abandons attack. The 2 swords performed the Sword of Heaven and Earth hidden sword spell, which was extremely similar but also completely different. They interweaved into a sword net, and none of the golden statues could block her sword, and none of the golden statues could even touch the corner of her clothes. Boom 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 boom! She shuttled through the pagoda forest, and the golden statue followed closely behind. The pagodas collapsed one after another. She casually took out several sariras. Fusing with the white bones, it became faster and stronger. Finally, the entire forest of towers collapsed. The sariras of all the eminent monks in the past 10,000 years had all been collected by her. In her originally empty eyes. At this moment, it was burning with raging flames. Looking back, there were still more than a dozen golden statues chasing after him. He turned around and faced the attack. His nimble sword light danced like flowing lights. It disappeared in a flash in the darkness. Returning to his original position, the dozen or so golden statues behind him all stood motionless and slowly collapsed. Invincible Buddha. Seeing the pagoda forest destroyed, Abbot Qiu Shan's eyes widened in anger, but he could not leave the Hall of Great Strength. After losing the forest of pagodas, the formation of the Heavenly King's devastation shook even more. Countless roars and howls rang out from beneath his feet, as if a group of ghosts from hell were slamming against the gates of hell. Once they lost the suppression, the demon folk would return to the world. Fellow Taoists, Mound Hill Temple is in trouble. Please come and rescue us. At this moment, a few streaks of light leapt over the horizon. Reinforcements had arrived. However, Xiaoan did not care at all. She took out the blood sea banner and swung it gently. It swelled up with the wind, and a sea of blood surged out. The thick blood drowned out the temples on the hills, desecrating the statues of the gods and Buddhas. Cries of alarm and misery rose and fell in the mountains. As soon as the monks fell into the sea of blood, countless skeletons grabbed them firmly and tore at them, reducing them to pools of blood in the blink of an eye. Only a single skeleton remained, hunting down the people who had fallen into the sea with the other skeletons. There were also many who leapt into the air due to their extraordinary cultivation, but a great, dark red wave surged over and swept them into the sea of blood. There were even flashes of light that turned and shot out, beheading all the monks who had flown high enough. Whether they had undergone the first or second heavenly tribulation, how could they withstand the sharpness of the forsaken immortal sword? A while later, the sea of blood had swallowed up all the hills, leaving only the Hall of Great Strength where the abbot resided as a lone island. Although the blood sea banner was so damaged that it could not be used in an open battle, it was still quite useful for attacking. After swallowing all the monks in the temple, the hole in the blood sea banner gradually closed up again, becoming even redder. The Buddhist light dimmed, and the formation collapsed. The figure of the Jtarastra vanished. Boom! The hall of great strength was thrown into the air. Demon chi surged out violently as countless demon folk of various sizes crawled out from the demon cavern. The abbot stood in the surging demon chi. He was rather dazed, as if he had just experienced a nightmare. He struggled to believe it. The Mound Hill temple that had stood for over 10,000 years had just been destroyed by his hands like this. Tears rolled down his cheeks as thousands of demon folk swallowed him up. Roar! A hysterical, furious roar killed thousands of demon folk and dispersed the surging demon chi. The abbot formed the inner and outer lion seal with his hands and used his entire cultivation. He turned into a frenzied, golden lion and lunged towards Little and looked over. His bearing was calm and peaceful. He even seemed rather benevolent. He extended a finger, and a huge wave over 300 meters tall rose up from the surging sea of blood, rushing into the clouds. It was like a great wall, separating them and falling towards the abbot. Bang! Blood splashed everywhere as countless skeletons shattered. The golden lion rushed out of the sea of blood. Enemy of the Buddha, I'll take you down with me. However, the place where Little and stood just now was now completely empty. He immediately felt empty inside. Only then did he hear the bell ring. He felt his chest ache. Lowering his head, he saw a skeleton that he had not smashed to pieces. It held a sword in its hand, plunging it deeply into his chest. The golden lion vanished, only leaving Abbot Cho Shan behind. He wanted to blow himself up and take down the enemy of the Buddha with him, but he was unable to do so. He was filled with resentment and reluctance. How can the orthodox Dharma of Buddhism be so restrained? How can it be so restrained? If it were not for the Buddha slaying sword, the great Buddha would have been able to force her into submission. If it were not for the blood sea banner, the formation of the heavenly king covers the earth would not have collapsed so quickly. The skeleton demon, who did not directly participate in the battle, also distracted the attention of the king of Yong province. The abandoned immortal sword played an even greater role. It first broke through the protective formation, then broke through the seal of the demon's lair, and killed the golden statues as if they were dogs. She unleashed the power of each transcendent artifact to the extreme. She took advantage of the weakness and struck a fatal blow. Little and did not reply. He pulled out the Buddha slaying sword. A ball of samdi flames of white bone surged into his body, and Abbot Cho Shan's resentful and unwilling face disappeared. At this point, she had completely recovered from the injuries she had suffered in the battle at the Ghost Tower. Her cultivation had even improved. She turned back to look at the rescuers. Abbot Cho Shan, the Shangqing great cultivators were all dumbfounded. The famous Cho Shan temple of Yong province had been destroyed in a single night. How was this possible? Enemy of the Buddha, there was a flash of golden light. An old monk rushed down without any regard for anything. He was also a monk king who had undergone 3 heavenly tribulations. Little and held both swords in his hands. He stepped on the sea of blood and flew up to meet the old monk. As the bell rang, their figures crossed each other. The old monk was defeated. The Shangqing great cultivators were shocked and quickly retreated. Floating astronomy. Chapter 1276. Yong province wasn't big. The Shangqing cultivators all arrived, but none of them dared to approach. It wasn't just because of the sea of blood, but also because of the demonic aura. Pitch-black devil chi was so thick that it was almost liquid, and it kept gushing out of the devil cave, piercing through heaven and earth. They spread out in the night sky and turned into demonic clouds that covered the stars and the moon. The area within a radius of 100 miles was dyed into demonic soil, and it was still expanding. Once cultivators entered this demonic land, they would be suppressed. Even their magic treasures would be contaminated by demonic chi. She was an exception. Since there was no such thing as life and death, the hungry ghost realm and the 9 regions could be equated. Similarly, there was no such thing as good or evil, so the demon realm was nothing. Why would a person who was neither dead nor alive be afraid of being contaminated by demonic chi? The thick and deep sea of blood was even more filthy and evil than the devil chi. The Black Dragon King tore through the night sky and stopped outside the demonic earth. The governor of Yongju could hardly believe that this was the Mound Hill Temple of the past. A few Shongqing cultivators reported to him what they had seen just now. Your Majesty, the enemy of Buddha is too powerful. It's hard to kill him anywhere else. If we enter Mound Hill Temple recklessly, we might suffer casualties. The governor of Yong Province gritted his teeth. Just you wait. I refuse to believe she can remain in this demon cavern forever. The demon folk will never thank her for opening the demon cavern. The howls of demon folk filled the surroundings. The black demon chi flickered with light that was as dense as the stars. These were the eyes of the demon folk filled with lust and evil. They all gathered on Little and dressed in white. She stood above the surging sea of blood and the surging demon chi, like a white lotus flower. Before the demon folk could attack, she struck. The blood sea banner was raised. The torrential sea of blood immediately poured into the devil's den, and the pairs of eyes were instantly filled with fear. The sea of blood was boundless, and there was no shore to turn back to. A few demon commanders did not hesitate to demonize, turning into hideous monsters. They abandoned their blood-corroded limbs and charged into the sky. As soon as the chaotic soul bell rang, they were like birds that had been shot by arrows, plunging headfirst into the sea of blood. Whether it be demon folk or monks, there was no difference. Cross the river in one go. Only when the Devil King appeared would she need to personally make a move. She would either kill the Buddha or abandon the immortal to kill him with a single sword strike. The surging sea of blood became even more viscous. The thick smell of blood could be smelled even from 100 miles away. More and more skeletons appeared in the sea of blood. Some of them were as strong as demon kings. All of them looked ferocious and had strange bones. They were all transformed from fallen demon kings. Crystalline demon hearts were deeply embedded in the white bones, and they even retained some of their original intelligence and techniques. However, they had already become slaves of the sea of blood, massacring demon folk. The great cultivators of the Harmony province watched this feast of slaughter with their mouths agape. Only now did they understand that she had not opened the demon cavern to lure demon folk in. Instead, she wanted to feed on these demon folk. Every time a demon king fell, the great cultivators would feel a chill in their hearts. They believed that they were not stronger than these demon kings. If he were to attack recklessly, he would be suppressed by the demonic chi, and his outcome would be even worse. From the ancient times until now, the demon folk invasions that had brought great calamities to the 9 provinces had actually been stopped by her alone, and she grew stronger the more she fought. In the end, she didn't even need to do anything herself. More and more powerful skeletal blood slaves appeared in the sea of blood. Although she could not command them as freely as she could command the skeleton demons, she could still command them with the blood sea banner. She wielded the blood sea banner and stood above the sea of blood, like the commander of an army, slaughtering the endless army of demon folk. A 3-headed, 6-armed demon king fought his way out of the encirclement. He was already missing 2 heads, and only 3 arms remained. He stared at her above the sea of blood in fear. What kind of monster are you? It was truly laughable for a demon king to ask a question like that, but no one could laugh. A strange, twisted sword landed in the demon king's hand. Before he could even respond, sword intent rushed into his sea of consciousness. His eyes rolled back, and his entire body convulsed. The demon king suddenly let out a strange, deranged smile. "Master, let me play too." Little Anne nodded. Ever since she had tossed the forsaken immortal sword into the blood sea banner, the sword soul had become much more obedient. Her relationship with the sword had already shifted. She was currently becoming the true master of the forsaken immortal step by step, branding her will deeply into the forsaken immortal sword soul. This was not because of a difference in strength. Only a mysterious existence like the 5 absolutes immortal would struggle to subdue the forsaken immortal with a cultivation of the 3rd heavenly tribulation. Instead, the forsaken immortal sword soul had already admitted defeat in the clash between the will of the human and the sword. The fact that it refused to devour her at a critical moment was already proof of fear. And, when she began to implement the will of the white bone bodhisattva in the path of white bone and great beauty, it was without a doubt the one that experienced it the most. Its twisted madness suddenly seemed as laughable as a clown. From a regular perspective, the forsaken immortal sword was a deranged sword. It could not be compared to a deranged bodhisattva at all. Even a sliver of the will's legacy was enough to subdue it, turning it into a true servant. The forsaken immortal sword soul forcefully devoured the Demon King's power, and the Demon King's colossal body rapidly shrank. Bones squeezed out from his flesh and blood, piercing through his skin and shooting out. They hovered vertically above the sea of blood and actually began to flash with light. Little and immediately understood what the forsaken immortal sword soul was trying to do. The Demon King said, "Sword formation of heaven and earth." With the forsaken immortal sword as the core and several hundred bones as support, a sword formation of heaven and earth was formed. The sea of blood descended and minced the demon folk furiously. Only the Demon King managed to fend it off, but he was unable to escape death. The great cultivators of the upper class were all dumbfounded. This sword, someone knew about the forsaken immortal sword. This sword is called the Forsaken Immortal. Legend has it that it was the Five Absolutes Immortals' sword, which was sealed in a sword tomb. Afterwards, it was obtained by the Sword Collection Palace, which is the renowned sword collection peak of the Green Province. Afterwards, it devoured Elder Tien and destroyed the entire sword collection palace. Then it breached the Chan monastery of Devarenjie and fought 3 people alone against Chu Lai King, the Dragon King of the Sea, and the Demon King of the North Moon, Li Qingshan. Afterwards, it was no match for them, so it opened the Demon Cavern. In the end, it was subdued by Li Qingshan. This is probably the most powerful weapon in the 9 provinces. Among us, there aren't many that are its opponent. This startling accomplishment made the great cultivators feel even more despair. They said in sorrow, "Let alone the invincible Buddha, even this sword is difficult to deal with. Is the Harmony Province really going to be doomed?" It's not just the Harmony Province, but the entire world. However, during the battle on Great Buddha Mountain, the Forsaken Immortal Sword had not actually unleashed its full power. A weapon needed a person to wield it. It was impossible for a masterless sword to unleash its full power. Most importantly, it did not have a source of power. It could not unleash its full power even if it possessed a supreme path of the sword. This was also the greatest reason for its failure in the past. Afterwards, although Little An became the master of the Forsaken Immortal Sword, not only did the Forsaken Immortal Sword not put in any effort, but it even constantly tried to devour him. Under these circumstances, Little An obviously could not give it too much power. She had to maintain its weakened state, so the power that the Forsaken Immortal Sword could unleash was not even as great as when it had no master. But now, as the soul of the Forsaken Immortal Sword gradually submitted, Little An began to give it even more support. The culprit that had once destroyed the 2 great sects of the Green Province was gradually unleashing its true power. Little An waved the Blood Sea banner, and the sea of blood delivered thousands of skeletons before her. She unleashed the Samdi flames of white bone, refining all the skeletons into 364 tiny white bone swords that were as thin as a cicada's wings. Although they did not have any special power, they were sharp, tough, and comparable to magic treasures. What was even rarer was that they formed a set of their own. She waved her hand, and the tiny white bone swords pierced through the air. They all pierced into the body of the Demon King that was suffering from the backlash, gradually soaking it in demonic blood. Good sword. The soul of the Forsaken Immortal Sword immediately abandoned the large bone swords and turned to control the tiny white bone swords to form the Heaven and Earth sword formation. In an instant, the lethality of the sword formation skyrocketed. Even if the Demon King was sucked into the sword formation, it would immediately be minced into meat paste without the slightest ability to resist. This was the first time they had worked together. Now, they did not even need the Buddha slaying sword, the Blood Sea banner, the chaotic soul bell, or anything else. Just one person and one sword were enough to sweep through the 9 provinces and kill demon kings like dogs. "Your Majesty, what should we do?" The Shangqing great cultivators looked at each other with fear in their eyes. Not to mention the fact that the odds of victory were extremely small. Even if they were lucky enough to kill the enemy of Buddha, how many of them would be able to survive? The governor of Yong province used the foresight chi technique and looked in all directions. The life force everywhere was weakening. Finally, he let out a long sigh. Fellow Taoists, let's return to our sects and defend them. How could cultivators risk their lives for mortals? Not to mention the other Shangqing great cultivators, even he, the governor of Yong province, was unwilling to do so. Suddenly, he remembered that the Mountain Temple was already in such a state. The other great sects might not be able to defend themselves either. Gather your disciples and follow me back to the Duke's residence. Chapter 1277. The slaughter lasted for an entire night until not a single demon folk dared to step out of the demon cavern anymore. At this time, it was the darkest time before dawn. Demonic chi filled the sky, making the darkness seem even darker. Little and waved the blood sea banner, and the surging sea of blood reversed and returned. It had expanded more than 10 times its original size, and it had also accumulated many powerful skeletal blood slaves. In the future, it would not only be used to trap enemies, but also to kill them. The sea of blood receded, and the numerous palaces and pavilions appeared once more. They actually hadn't suffered any serious damage, and the numerous stone Buddha statues were still standing there solemnly. However, they'd been corroded to the point of being mottled, and the Buddha light and spirituality contained within them had completely vanished. The sea of blood had been desecrated and the demonic aura had been polluted. This place would no longer be Bikuni Mountain. She quietly walked past the temples. This was the first time in her life that she had personally destroyed a Jiolan. Although the battle at the Great Buddha Mountain had caused a lot of destruction, it had been forced upon them. Moreover, the destruction of the Great Buddha Mountain was the result of the demon domain's invasion. He then recalled the 2 vows of the White Bone Bodhisattva, the infinite Buddhist vow to destroy, and the supreme Buddhist vow to end. Finally, he gathered the 4 great vows into one body. He had many comprehensions in his heart. Comprehensions were just as important as resources. In many cases, comprehensions were even harder to come by. She suddenly stood in front of a stone Buddha statue, put her palms together, closed her eyes, and chanted the Diamond Sutra. Everything that exists is like a dream, an illusion, a bubble, and a shadow, like dew, or like lightning. This is how one should view it. Everything is impermanent, all techniques have no self, impermanence has no self, life and death are the same, Buddha and demon are the same. Her body emitted a faint Buddhist light. It exuded warmth in the darkness, illuminating the stone Buddha in front of him. The Buddha's face flowed in the light. He seemed to lower his head to look at her. The divine nun of the South Sea's stern face appeared in his mind again, gradually fading away. The Tao that she wanted to walk on was no longer something that could be restrained by mere rules. He had thought that balancing the Buddha and the demon was a different way, but it turned out that he was just being presumptuous. Just like a river changing its course, it still had to flow east into the sea. Even if it dried up halfway, seeped into the earth, and evaporated into the sky. They were all just a part of the world's water system. This was the great Tao created by a bodhisattva. How could it be so easily surpassed or distorted? Even if he wanted to go berserk, he couldn't do it. That was why there were no problems with her path of white bone and great beauty. That experience seemed to only be for her to walk further. The path of white bone and great beauty was different from the 9 transformations of the demonic and divine. What it pursued was not a balance between the demonic and divine, a world of its own. Instead, it was the origin of emptiness, nirvana into destruction. After understanding this, the light of Buddha melted into the white bones. Her face became even more peaceful and tranquil. She silently faced the stone Buddha. Anyone who saw her would think that she was the most devout believer. Was the Tao of the White Bone Bodhisattva just one of the infinite Buddhist Dharma and the supreme Buddhist Tao? Perhaps becoming a demon was just an illusion. She had no idea that he had completely mastered the first 3 layers of the path of white bone and great beauty in an instant. At this moment, she already had the qualifications to ascend. Not only could she ascend to the next level, she could obtain the Sutuor Creek fruit. He could even cast aside the threat of the hungry ghost realm. However, she made the same choice as Li Qingshan, who was thousands of miles away. She gave up on ascending and continued to condense her power. Suddenly, the sword Qi was awe-inspiring and murderous. The Forsaken Immortal Sword's 364 small white-bone swords assembled into the sword formation of heaven and earth. They revolved rapidly and shot towards her. The halls and halls along the way were all reduced to smithereens. The bluish-white monk robes were lifted up by the murderous aura. She did not move at all, as if she was completely submerged in cultivation. She did not dodge, nor did she resist. The Forsaken Immortal Sword approached within a meter of her before suddenly slowing down. The edge of the sword trembled gently, slicing through the air and leaving behind black slashes that conjured a myriad of sword forms. The 364 small white-bone swords revolved around her. By devouring the Demon King and killing the demon folk, it had gathered unprecedented power. Now was the perfect time for a backlash. It was also her last chance. Clang! The 365 swords thrummed together and rapidly shrank. A strand of her hair was severed by the edge of the sword, drifting to the ground slowly. This was the first time she had been injured since the Battle of the Ghost Tower. She opened her eyes slightly and gazed at the Forsaken Immortal Sword that was only inches away. In that moment, the world seemed to lose all color, turning pale. The soul of the Forsaken Immortal Sword felt like everything had lost its meaning. Even its consciousness had become empty in this pale world. It could not forget this feeling anymore. It thought blankly, she's only at the third heavenly tribulation, so how can she possess such willpower? Don't tell me she's a reincarnated immortal like the Wujue ghosts. When she extended her hand, the Forsaken Immortal Sword turned around, allowing her to grasp the hilt. In that moment, the balance was completely broken. The imprint had already been imprinted. Master and servant were now separated. From now onwards, the Forsaken Immortal Sword no longer had the opportunity for a backlash. Even when she was heavily injured and unconscious, she could only protect her master wholeheartedly. The Forsaken Immortal Sword was enveloped in the Samdi flames of white bone. She gripped the hilt tightly, which was coated with a pattern of hollow white bone, vaguely forming a skeleton. The shape was actually not important. What mattered was that she had completely refined the Forsaken Immortal Sword. As if nothing had happened at all, the soul of the Forsaken Immortal Sword grumbled, "Master, these swords aren't very useful." "Yeah." Little and communicated with the soul of the Forsaken Immortal Sword. He reforged all of the small white bone swords according to the soul's wishes. The artifact forging section could be considered the most important section of the path of white bone and great beauty. It was not just an external object, but an extension of her body. It was equivalent to a sword cultivator's lifebound sword, or even more so. Over the years, she had basically never stopped forging various white bone artifacts. Even her white bone and great beauty could be viewed as another form of artifact. Her artifact forging methods were extremely brilliant. As long as white bone was used as the raw material, even if it was not an artifact recorded in the path of white bone and great beauty, she could still forge it. Within the blazing flames, the small white bone swords gradually melted and reformed. All of them became strangely twisted. Some of them were curved like blades, some were at right angles, and some only had half of them. Not a single one of them looked like a sword. In the end, even the number changed. Originally, there were 364 of them, which made up 365 with the Forsaken Immortal Sword, but now, there were only 139 of them. Not only was the number much smaller, but they were also completely unbalanced, giving off the feeling that they were twisted and incomplete. There were many sets of artifacts in the world. None of them would use such a meaningless number. However, the soul of the Forsaken Immortal Sword was overjoyed. It said in a flattering manner, "This is great. This is exactly what I wanted. This way, it'll be even easier to kill. Master, you treat me much better than that old fiend." This was not completely false. To the fiend immortal, the path of the sword was only one of the 5 absolutes. Even though it was the most important path of killing, The problem was that there was no one in the 9 provinces who was his opponent. Moreover, the Forsaken Immortal Sword was not a good sword to him. He would have to give it up sooner or later, so why would he waste the effort to forge such a twisted sword formation? It was not as interesting as playing the zither or painting. For little Anne, there were many threats in front of her. The most direct threat was the great cultivators of the various provinces, as well as the demons from the demonic domain. Yongju and Mound Mountain Temple were just the beginning. The biggest threat was the Hungry Ghost Realm and the Great Xia Dynasty, which she did not know what they were up to. This was her war alone, and the enemy was the entire world. At least for a long time, the destructive power of the Forsaken Immortal Sword would be worth using. The soul of the sword could also save her a lot of effort to use other methods. Thus, she continued to forge artifacts. One by one, the skull prayer beads rolled out of the Samdi white bone fire and turned into skeleton demons. They bowed to her and flew off in all directions. When she had forged 33 skull prayer beads, all the white bone artifacts that she had lost in the battle at the Ghost Tower were finally restored. She did not stop there. She forged another 3 skull prayer beads, making up a total of 36 beads. In an instant, every skeleton demon scattered throughout Yongju became even more powerful and ferocious. Their strength surpassed that of ordinary demon kings and great cultivators, reaching the middle stage of the 3rd heavenly tribulation. Although there were only 3 additional skull prayer beads, it made the entire string of skull prayer beads reach a higher level. The 36 skull prayer beads symbolized the 36 types of troubles. There were 6 of them, each representing the 3 types of suffering: joy, loss, good and evil, and peace. They combined to form 36 types of troubles. This was a transitional stage for the skull prayer beads to advance from low grade to middle grade. 27 skull prayer beads were only low grade. Only when there were 54 skull prayer beads would it be considered middle grade. Little Anne did not continue to forge skull prayer beads. It was still a little difficult for her to forge 54 skull prayer beads. Even if she was short of one, it would only be a quantitative change. A dozen more skeleton demons would not make much of a difference. Thus, she continued to forge the Chaos Soul Bell. This was the latest white bone artifact that she had forged. However, she had not had the time to forge it further, so its power was much weaker. Now was the time to put it to use. To be continued. Chapter 1278. A mountain of clouds passed through the blue sky. Li Fengyuan stood on the surging clouds, gazing down at the ground sternly. After receiving her news, he had rushed to the Harmony province as soon as possible, but what he saw was this. The sun scorched the ground. It should have been the season for vegetation to grow, but there was only endless, yellowish-brown barren land as far as the eye could see. There were no birds in the air, and there were no fish in the water. Even the deserts of the Scarlet Province and the tundra of the Frost Province should not be so deathly still. A feathered person said, "My king, I heard that she's even opened the largest demon cavern in the Harmony Province. Right now, demon chi surges into the sky from the north, polluting the region of 500 kilometers. Even demon folk struggle to compare to such evil deeds. Even if that's the case, are you still going to help her?" Li Fengyuan looked away and gazed at the sky. She no longer needs my help, nor does she need anyone else's help. Let's return to the Cloud Province. No, let's directly go to the East Sea and leave this place of trouble. The feathered people all said, "My king is wise." Li Fengyuan suddenly turned around. He could vaguely hear the strange sound of a bell. The feathered people sensed nothing. They asked curiously, "My king, what's wrong?" "Nothing. Let's go." The mountain of clouds flew off, leaving behind a long trail as it headed east, vanishing into the horizon. Ding! Clang! The sound of the bell swept through the plains with little Anne, landing gracefully in a city. She stood on the tallest building in the city barefoot before taking off high into the air again. The chaotic soul bell on her waist rang, in the busy, sweaty streets, in the restaurants where people toasted each other. Wherever the sound of the bell passed by, the souls were thrown into disarray. Suddenly, it turned into a ball of pale white flames, rushing into the sky strand by strand, chasing after her. She seemed to wander through the world aimlessly, followed by millions of streaks of pale white flames. She crossed mountains and valleys, passed through day and night, the Dragon Province. Thousands of mountains surged towards the center like waves, clustered around a tall mountain. It was like a huge dragon in the ocean had raised its head, ready to soar off. This was the greatest ley line in the world, Dragon Head Mountain. It was said that the mountain was transformed from the corpse of a true dragon, but that was a matter from 1,000,000 years ago. The dragons had already left this world a long time ago. Many legends could no longer be verified. At the peak of the mountain, there was a great hall that was over 1,000 feet tall. It left the sea of clouds at its feet and was almost connected to the sky. It had the power to dominate the 9 prefectures. Under the sunlight. Once again, it was filled with extraordinary splendor. Changes swirled. It was as if it was shrouded in neon lights, extremely magnificent and glorious. It didn't seem like it was made by humans, much less by humans. And that was indeed the case. This was the Senate built by the gods in the Divine Kingdom era. All the deity races would send representatives to hold a meeting here. The original elders of the 7 god clans were responsible for coordinating the disputes between the various races, discussing strategies to fend off the demon folk, and suppressing the riots of the slaves. Other than the giant lumberman, most of the gods' figures were similar to that of humans. It was said that they were influenced by the Dragon Clan, and that was why this hall was so huge. In order to celebrate the arrival of a new era and increase the authority of their own race, the various races had done their best to build this grand hall. There should not have been such a tall mountain in the world. It was the clay people who had uplifted Dragon's Head Mountain to such an unbelievable height, and the merfolk who had changed the flow of several hundred rivers to form a natural formation. The master architects of the Night Roamers had balanced the styles of the various races and designed the original shape of the hall. The featherfolk were known for their elegance, but they were used to interacting with the clouds, so all they could do was lower themselves and do some lowly work, transporting materials from afar or even from the sea to add to the structure of the hall. It was said that the featherfolk had once designed a cloud ladder that wrapped around Dragon's Head Mountain all year round, reaching straight to the top. Afterwards, it was destroyed in the flames of war, just like the giant lumberman's meticulously designed floating gardens. However, the huge rocks forged by the fire-devouring folk and the metal ornaments personally embedded by the metal diamonds could not be destroyed so easily. Even after thousands of years, they remained firm and shiny. That was probably the only time the gods' people had worked together for something. Afterwards, even when demon folk invaded, it was filled with schemes and schemes, both open and covert. They were even tempted to destroy the opposing races. The lowly slaves were the best cannon fodder, especially the humans who could become demon folk at any time. Instead, the diamonds that could serve as mounts seemed a little more amiable. However, by then, the humans already possessed their own sects, schools, and even beliefs. Generation after generation of cultivators overcame the obstacles, using more and more profound cultivation methods to close the distance between them and the gods' people. After a long period of accumulation, the demon race produced demon kings. Every single one of them possessed powerful abilities and untamed personalities. Finally, one day, both the god and the demon were heavily injured. The slaves obtained freedom, and the mounts broke free from their reins. By the time the young man traversed the 9 provinces with the hawk and wolf and ascended Dragon's Head Mountain, the gods' people had become other folk, and the hall had gone from the Council of Elders to the Imperial Court, continuing to rule over the 9 provinces. At this moment, the Emperor of the Great Shia currently sat on the golden throne. His face beneath the crown was filled with dignity. The civil and military officials, the 3 ducal ministers and 9 ministers, stood to the 2 sides with ceremonial tablets in their hands. In such a colossal hall, it was unavoidable for the humans to seem insignificant. However, the aura they gave off was like that of giants, and that was the result of them purposefully concealing it. Otherwise, the aura of any one of them would be able to fill the entire hall. A stern voice echoed in the hall. According to the report of the governor of Yong Province, the foe of Buddha has wreaked havoc in Yong Province, and not a single living being has survived. Other than the capital, Great Liang City, and the place where the banyan tree king is entrenched, the cultivation sects in other places have all been destroyed. Many cultivators have retreated into Great Liang City. The demons of Yong Province have received a warning from the banyan tree king. They either hide deep underground, gather around the banyan tree king, or simply flee Yong Province. The protector hawk god paused and concluded, Yong Province is finished. The hall was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. The danger of the foe of Buddha was beyond everyone's expectations. They all looked at where the three ducal ministers were. Grand Preceptor Dong was long gone, and the expressions of the remaining two grew increasingly gloomy. Originally, when they reached their positions, all they had to consider was ascension. The threat of death no longer existed, but now, they deeply felt it once more. Grand Preceptor Dong's death was completely meaningless. It was basically like he had been slaughtered in passing, as lowly as a mortal. Back then, he had already been treated as a challenge to the entire Great Shia. But looking at it now, perhaps he did not take the Great Shia seriously at all. The Emperor of the Great Shia asked, "Where is she right now? I can't lock onto her. She might come to the Dragon Province." There was a series of whispers in the hall. What if the foe of Buddha came to the Dragon Province? Was she going to be like the governor of Yong Province, hiding on Dragonhead Mountain? Their sects and dwellings were scattered across the Dragon Province. If they retreated, it would be a great humiliation. Floating astronomy. Chapter 1279. Silence. Sai Ching shouted. He wore the gilded dragon robe of the Crown Prince and stood beside the throne, in charge of maintaining order in the hall. This job sounded quite authoritative, but it was just a fox borrowing the tiger's might. If there were eunuchs in this world, this would be the work of a eunuch. He was extremely annoyed, but he did not dare to show it on his face. After all, he was the weakest among the Crown Princes. Even Sai Bao, who went through the tribulation later than him, was stronger than him. This was because his physical body was destroyed by Li Qingshan and his strength was greatly reduced. The hatred in his heart had never subsided and was growing with each passing day. The hall immediately quieted down. The emperor said, "Our great Shia, with all the officials and generals in the court, can't think of a way to deal with a mere person." The head of the 9 ministers, Zhong Zai, said, "I have something to say. If it's just to deal with the enemy of Buddha, there are many ways. It's not impossible to kill her, but we need to use the power of the whole country. Now is the crucial moment of worship to the heavens. After the worship succeeds, the enemy of Buddha is just a small problem. If the worship fails, even if we kill the enemy of Buddha, the 9 regions will not escape the fate of being swallowed by the hungry ghost realm." The left imperial advisor said, "It's not difficult to force the hungry ghost realm to retreat, but this time, the hungry ghost realm is here for the enemy of Buddha, and they are determined to get it at all cost." The emperor frowned. "The enemy of Buddha again." Zhong Zai said, "The left imperial advisor is right. The problem is not just the hungry ghost realm. The enemy of Buddha has already opened dozens of demon dens. If this continues, there will be an unprecedented demon disaster soon. Although it is indeed the enemy of Buddha that caused this situation. However, our enemy is not just one person, but 2 worlds." The emperor suddenly stood up. He said angrily, "Is this enemy of Buddha sent by the heavens to go against us? Are you going to let us watch her run amok without doing anything?" In an instant, the wind and clouds outside the hall surged and thunder rumbled. Zhong Zai said, "A little impatience will spoil the great plan. Your Majesty, please prioritize the worship to the heavens." All the ministers said, "Your Majesty, please prioritize the worship to the heavens." The great Shia emperor slowly sat down again. "Forget it. When the worship to the heavens is completed, a mere enemy of Buddha will be easily captured. Eagle King, have you found the reincarnated celestial?" The protector Eagle God replied, "Not yet. The various prefectures have prepared a list of names, and there are some people with extraordinary talents among them. He might have been a cultivator in his previous life. But it's not the celestial we're looking for. Most of them just happened to retain some memories of their past lives. They didn't even know what cultivation was in their past lives, so they couldn't be considered as reincarnations of deities. Perhaps the celestial being's memory hadn't recovered and he hadn't remembered his mission. Otherwise, he would definitely come to the Dragon Province. The reincarnation of a deva was actually a vague concept. All living beings revolved in the 6 paths of reincarnation. Any random person he grabbed could be considered a reincarnation. Only he was a cultivator in his previous life and had some memories of his previous life. Only then could he be called the reincarnation of a celestial being. The problem was that 9 regions spanned hundreds of thousands of miles, and the population at its peak was more than 10 billion. There were too many talented people. On the other hand, there was truly no way to verify the memories of one's previous lifetime. Even if one did exist, it would mostly be blurry and incomplete, and one could only rely on one's comprehension ability and speed of cultivation. Even if some people refused to admit it themselves, others would still believe they were the reincarnations of a celestial being, such as little Anne. As a result, there were just far too many people in the world who claimed to be reincarnations of a celestial being. However, the imperial court of Great Shia only wanted to find a single person. Over all these years, they had ordered the Hawkwolf Guard to search the various places silently, but they had never found anything. Many years ago, there was someone like that in the Clear River Prefecture, called Chu Tian. Back then, Jiyu Yangying was still the White Hawk commander of the Rui Commandery, but whether it was intentional or not, she did not cooperate with her father's work at all. Afterwards, Chu Tian died young, and the reincarnation of a celestial being became a joke. As for the celestial the imperial court of Great Shia was looking for, he never appeared. Under the hazy moonlight, the night mist enveloped the tiny islands in the lake. It was as if they had not been affected by the upheaval of the world at all. It was as tranquil as a painting. A man and a woman strolled along the shore. The man was handsome and elegant, while the woman was beautiful and enchanting. They seemed to be a pair of immortal companions who had grown tired of conflict and returned to seclusion hand in hand. "Why are you so special to me?" The woman was rather confused, but she was also rather eager. A sliver of surprise flashed through the man's eyes, as if he had never expected someone as clever as her to ask such a stupid question. He said with complete sincerity, "Because you've always been very special. Heh, you must be especially bad." The woman lowered her eyes and smiled in a self-deprecating manner. "Yeah, not only are you especially bad, but you're also very cruel." The man smiled. "Yeah, I've always thought I hid it very well." The woman smiled as well. "It's useless. I've always experienced it deeply, but it seems like the past White Hawk commanders of the Rui Commandery have all been like that." The man smiled bitterly as if he was helpless. The woman grumbled, "Oi, if you're talking about me, then so be it, but do you have to talk about my master too?" The man was mildly surprised. He had never seen her behave like this before. It was actually surprisingly enchanting. Suddenly, he remembered that she had practiced arts of charm in the past, but the sliver of affection was not fake. He smiled. Just like the saying, like master, like disciple. Senior Jiyu obviously has her reasons for accepting you as her disciple. Any observant person can see how special you are. Perhaps she just finds me particularly annoying, so she specially accepted me as her disciple so that she can torture me, the woman said half jokingly, half seriously. "I've never heard of something like that. Accepting someone as your disciple just because you hate them." The man laughed aloud. His clear laughter alarmed a flock of egrets. "There have always been many strange things in the world. Isn't there one of the 8 sufferings of Buddhism called the Society of Resentment?" The woman turned her head to the side and looked at the man. The man looked back at her. "Yeah, I don't think much about that. I feel like the greatest sufferings of life are not being able to get what you want." The woman shifted her gaze. "What do you want?" The man suddenly changed the topic. "The playboy who was the primary disciple of the School of Legalism was infatuated with your master. Unfortunately, he's already left the Rui Commandery, or I'd definitely invite him for a drink so that I can ask him for guidance on how to free myself from the pain of not being able to get what I want." The woman fell silent for a while before saying, "Do you know? The person I hate the most is my master." The man asked curiously, "Why?" The woman stopped and stared at the drifting moonlight in the lake. I haven't told you about my past, have I? No. The man shook his head. Her past had always been a mystery. Do you want to hear it? That's exactly what I want. The man could sense the woman's heart opening up to him. His efforts over the years had finally paid off. Joy surged through his heart. Wasn't what he had done everything he could to obtain that sincerity? Only by obtaining that sincerity could he personally shatter it and take back everything that belonged to him. Qian Rongji, this is my, Chu Tian's, revenge. To be continued. P.S. I'm going to my aunt's tomorrow, and then I'll take a bus home, so I'm taking a day off. Yep, that's it. Chapter 1280. Did you know? My surname was originally Shangguan. Qian Rongji stared at the rippling moonlight in the lake in a daze. It was as if her soul had already passed through time and returned to a very, very long time ago. All that remained here was an empty shell. Lin Xian smiled. Shangguan Rongji sounds better. However, when she spat out the matters of the past that she had buried deeply, Lin Xian gradually stopped smiling. Lin Xian couldn't laugh anymore. He didn't know what to say. Even though he had lived 2 lives and experienced numerous dangers, so much so that he had become indifferent to all sorts of slaughter and death. However, the pain in the depths of people's hearts, the unforgettable and unspeakable humiliation, even he felt bitter when the person involved personally mentioned it. He could not help but think back to his 2 lives. Compared to what she had gone through, it could be described as smooth sailing. The greatest setback he had suffered was when he had yet to recover his memories and was called Chu Tian. However, even Chu Tian had spent most of his life being arrogant, complacent, and heartless. Qian Rongji's voice was extraordinarily indifferent, as if she was talking about someone else. Lin Xian could not help but feel a hint of sympathy, but he immediately dismissed that thought. He recovered his pride as a celestial. There are plenty of pitiful people in the world. Just how many of them will become demonesses like her? Since there's so much pain in life, why don't you just die earlier? Why do you have to trouble others? How dare you ruin my mission, preventing me from reporting back to the Dragon Province? You deserve to die. Qian Rongji, oh Qian Rongji, if I don't toy with you like a dog and then torture you to death, I won't be able to dispel my hatred. However, sorrow and pity appeared on his handsome face. He interrupted her, unable to bear it any longer. Rongji. Don't say any more. Qian Rongji's shoulders trembled. She slowly turned around and said sorrowfully, Lin Xian, I've never mentioned this to anyone before. Please listen to me, alright? I want you to know about my true past, but if you're sick of hearing it, you can leave. You can pretend like nothing has happened. Alright, go ahead. Lin Xian said helplessly. After changing his attitude, he no longer felt pity for her. Instead, it was filled with cruel pleasure. Tearing open her old scars and making her bleed, this could also be considered a part of revenge. Until Qian Rongji finished speaking in one breath. His face was already covered in tears. Am I a monster? He asked in a daze. Yes. You are a monster, a twisted and insane monster. You can even say those details. How shameless. Lin Xian thought. He took a step forward and said passionately, No, none of this was your fault. It's the Qian clan's people who deserve to die. But since you've already taken revenge, why don't you let it go? Your master isn't torturing you, he's trying to make you turn back. Can we really turn back? Qian Rongji was at a loss. She looked at her hands and her eyes became firm again. No, there's no turning back. If I turn back, I'll have nothing left. I can only continue like this. Sometimes I think I'm doomed to suffer all my life. If that's the case, how can I escape the arrangement of fate? You don't have nothing. You still have me. I'll always be with you. Qian Rongji's expression changed. Really? Listen to what I've said. It's true. I, Lin Xian, swear to the heavens that I'll be with you forever. The boundless will of the 9 provinces obviously did not pay attention to her frivolous words. However, just like any woman intoxicated in love, she became emotionally moved and could not help but throw herself at her lover. Lin Xian hesitated for a moment, but he still opened his arms firmly. This was a godsend opportunity. Even a weak child could kill an unguarded adult, not to mention that the difference in strength between them was not that great. He could not delay the matter of the heaven-climbing vine any longer. The Dragon Province was currently searching for him. If he wanted to enter the royal court of the Dragon Province gloriously, he had to take action. When they embraced each other tightly, Lin Xian felt a wave of pain. However, with his willpower, he could endure it. Qian Rongji's hoarse, apologetic voice rang out by his ear. "Sorry, I've already done my best to restrain myself." Lin Xian said sincerely, "You've already given me the best. What's a little pain worth?" He considered how he could capture her without killing her immediately. "Really? I'll give you more, much more," Qian Rongji murmured. She kissed Lin Xian's neck with her red lips, gently licking and kissing it. A cloud just happened to block out the moonlight. The atmosphere of darkness permeated the air. Lin Xian thought about the past she spoke of and felt disgust. However, this disgust turned into shock very soon. Pain that was hundreds of times greater than what he was just now suddenly surged into his soul. His eyes suddenly widened, and he let out a meaningless gurgling sound from his mouth. Even a reincarnated celestial would not be able to ignore the pain of hell. Not to mention her almost insane method of cultivation. She possessed thousands of hell snakes instead of just borrowing the power of hell. She could be described as a living hell. "This is the best thing I have. Do you like it? Don't worry, I'll satisfy you completely." Before he knew it, Qian Rongji's eyes had turned into the cold eyes of a snake before he knew it. Hell snakes crawled all over her face. Even her red lips and tongue were entangled with venomous snakes, hissing and flicking their tongues. Lin Xian's face darkened as his veins bulged. He squeezed out 2 words from between his teeth, "Rongji." He still struggled to believe that his identity had been exposed. He was confident that his disguise was perfect. From Chu Tian to Lin Xian, he had indeed become a completely different person. No matter how careful Qian Rongji was, it was impossible for her to discover any traces of him. Just what had gone wrong, or was she still testing him? Chu Tian. Qian Rongji's voice was extremely excited. She hugged him firmly, as if her arms wanted to squeeze into his body. Hell snakes wormed their way into his body, gnawing at his soul. "Did you know? I hate it when others pity me the most. Am I that pitiful? I'll make them 100 times, 1,000 times more pitiful than me. Fortunately, I'm not that cruel. At the very least, I won't pity them. All right, I've already given you so much. It's about time you pay me back." A vine extended, stabbing into Chu Tian's dantian. Chu Tian did his best to concentrate. "Let me go, or I'll take you down with me." "All right. I can't wait anymore." Qian Rongji wrapped herself even tighter, like a huge python that had swallowed an elephant. Even if she was about to choke to death, she would not let go of the prey in her mouth. "You madman." Chu Tian was filled with regret. He should not have cared about the dignity of celestials. He should have asked for reinforcements from the imperial court earlier. At this moment, the heaven-climbing vine pierced his dantian. It was empty, without the existence of a golden core. A purple light lit up on his forehead. A small purple person that looked like a nascent soul turned into a purple light and flew away. He cultivated the purple mansion heavenly book of the 10,000 heavenly book. He opened up the purple mansion instead of forming a golden core. He had the power of a nascent soul cultivator during the second heavenly tribulation. Most of it was to deal with Qian Rongji, but he did not expect that he would use an escape technique similar to the nascent soul projection at the beginning. Qian Rongji let go of Chu Tian's body that had been sucked dry by the heaven-climbing vine. She chuckled. "Coward." Chapter 1281. The purple dwarf crashed into a colorful barrier and bounced back violently. The colorful barrier squirmed continuously. It was actually formed by countless venomous snakes. It was her venomous snake hell. Legalism was best at imprisonment. Hell was equivalent to a prison, suppressing the evil spirits and ghosts of the 6 realms of reincarnation and the Trichilia chasm. Impossible. Only a true legalist cultivator can form a domain like this. She's only at the 2nd heavenly tribulation. The tiny purple person finally revealed a look of fear. After he escaped from his purple mansion, even ordinary formations could not stop him. He did not expect to be trapped by her. If it were an ordinary 2nd heavenly tribulation legalist disciple, they naturally would not be able to do anything to him. There were many legalists in the world, but most of them only borrowed the aura of hell. They were equivalent to prison guards standing outside the prison, inflicting pain on others. If they really had a taste of what it was like to invite someone into the urn, they would change their expressions and desperately refuse. However, there were very few who would directly attract the hot winds of hell and be possessed by venomous snakes like the master and disciple. Although this could temper the soul, greatly benefit cultivation, and give one powerful combat ability, what was the point of living if one had to endure such pain day and night? It would even greatly damage one's mind. Furthermore, once one was possessed, it would be difficult to escape for the rest of their lives. Many legalists who dared to take this step ended up becoming lunatics or committing suicide. It was said that even after death, one would be dragged into the corresponding hell, never to be reincarnated. The illustrations of Naraka became a taboo among legalists, and not many cultivated it. However, Jiyu Yangying had an extraordinary background. She had more means to increase her strength. She had always been hoping for the Kuan Peng feather, so she was not too eager for quick success. She would consider her tolerance and slowly attract the hot winds, then adjust and adapt to ensure that it would not affect her mind. It took her many years to reach this stage. Qian Rongji was different. Whether it be her background, insight, ability to comprehend, or talent, she was nowhere close to Jiyu Yangying's. She drew over as many hell snakes as she could in a method that was close to self-destruction. She did not consider the so-called limits at all. She turned herself into a snake cave, unable to accommodate even one venomous snake. She should have gone crazy long ago, but this behavior was no different from madness. She should have died long ago. This was no different from seeking death. However, the deeper the pain, the stronger the resentment. Cursing everything in hell. Therefore, every time she went deep into cultivation, such a miniature venomous snake hell would appear. It formed its own domain and trapped him. Qian Rongji advised calmly, Lin Xian, just explode yourself. While there is still a chance, let's perish together. Suddenly, he laughed. Others might think that we are dying for love. Chu Tian wanted to use self-detonation as a threat, but he was instantly speechless. This crazy woman. Once he self-detonated, his soul would be destroyed. He was the reincarnation of a dignified celestial, and he still had a boundless future ahead of him. How could he die together with such a crazy woman? As a result, she calmed down. Rongji, I think we can still talk. Whether it's Chu Tian or Lin Xian, neither of them have done anything to let you down, so why must they both suffer like this? I've lost this round, so the sky-climbing vine is yours. I can also give you a very good cultivation technique to completely relieve your pain. I will leave Qingju forever, and from then on, we will mind our own business. Qian Rongji said furiously, you're lying. These venomous snakes have penetrated deep into my soul, so how can I relieve them? Hope rose up in Chu Tian's heart. No, there's nothing impossible. There's a heavenly text in the heavenly tome of all called. Qian Rongji listened patiently. She seemed rather tempted. Chu Tian said, let me go, and I'll give you this heavenly text. Qian Rongji frowned. What if you go back on your word if I let you go? After another round of negotiation, they finally reached a compromise. Chu Tian threatened, if you still don't agree, I'll blow up my violet palace immediately. Suddenly, he felt a strange weight, and his consciousness blurred slightly. A strand of black chi surged from the forehead of the purple person. What did you do? Since it's a viper hell, it's obviously poisonous. However, it's just far too slow. Qian Rongji smiled. The venom of the hellish snakes could harm the body at all, but it could corrode and numb the soul. Chu Tian cultivated the Violet Palace heavenly tome, so his soul was extraordinarily powerful. That was why he could last until now. Chu Tian discovered that she had been stalling for time the entire time. He said firmly, "I want to go with you." Before he had even finished speaking, Qian Rongji suddenly opened the viper hell and retreated. Chu Tian was caught between a rock and a hard place. If he chased after her right now, would Qian Rongji really die with the speed of his violet palace? With a thought, he turned into a streak of violet light and flew towards the east. As long as there was a chance of survival, who would just let it go? Coward. Qian Rongji turned into a streak of multicolored light and dove underground. She twisted and turned, heading north. On the border between the Green Province and the Dragon Province was the former Ice Sword Cliff, now the Thousand Blade Glacier. So many years had passed, and the blazing sun had scorched it countless times in the summer, but it still hadn't melted much. Instead, it would become even more solid and huge in every winter. A streak of violet light landed on the glacier and turned back into a small purple figure. However, its original clear face had blurred, and it was enveloped in a layer of black mist. The venom had completely taken effect, and he was filled with reluctance. "I'm a genius of the human path, the first senior brother of the Myriad Phenomenon sect. I carry an important mission, so how can I die here? It's all that woman's fault. That damned woman." He sat down with his legs crossed and did his best to gather his will to purge the venom. With the wonders of the Violet Palace Heavenly Tome, it was no problem for him to suppress the venom and rush to the imperial court of the Dragon Province. Qian Rongji suddenly walked out from behind a glacier. "You've come." Chu Tian was filled with shock. With his speed, he should have shaken her off a long time ago. Moreover, he had clearly gone east. "Don't forget that I'm the White Hawk commander. The celestial the imperial court is looking for is you, right?" Qian Rongji walked up to him and crouched down. She extended her hand, and a small snake slithered out from her violet palace and returned to her hand. The snake was thinner than a strand of hair, able to burrow into his paws. "Lin Xian, why didn't you die with me? You originally had a chance." Chu Tian was already speechless. His consciousness was a blur, and he was basically unable to maintain his human form. Her voice seemed to ring out from extremely far away. The fury in his heart made him try to focus and detonate his violet palace. A vine wrapped around him gently and sucked him dry. It flashed with purple light and flowed into Qian Rongji's body through the vine. She closed her eyes and raised her head, letting out a moan of extreme pleasure. Countless shattered consciousnesses flew through her sea of consciousness. Most of them were Lin Xian and Chu Tian's memories. There were also some distant and blurry memory fragments that she could not clearly identify. They must have come from her past life. However, one of the memories was extremely clear. It was even clearer than the memories of her current life, as if it had been branded into her soul. Qian Rongji opened her eyes. "So that's what it was." She said sorrowfully, "Don't worry. I'll complete your final wish." Then she smiled. "From today onwards, I'm you." She stood up and crossed over the layers of glacier, making her way towards the Dragon Province. Floating astronomy. Chapter 1282. Hungry Ghost Gate. The Hungry Ghost's mouth was completely torn apart, and no one could stop it anymore. Under the gazes of countless ghouls, the white bone tower that looked like sharp fangs and horns soared into the sky, piercing into the depths of the astral winds until it connected with the sky. Boom! The whole world seemed to tremble, like a lamb whose throat had been pierced by a wolf's teeth, trembling on the brink of death. The color of the sky changed. The color of death replaced the deep blue and slowly spread out. It wasn't fast, but it was unstoppable. It wouldn't stop until the sky was completely dyed. In the gray sky, pairs of eyes overlooked the land of the 9 prefectures. All living beings looked up, crying out in fear and fleeing in panic. Like an ant's nest that had been dug open, they crawled all over the ground in a mess. Even the most powerful ants were shocked. This was a great calamity that the 9 states had never seen before. Compared to this, the repeated invasions of demon folk basically seemed like child's play. The demon folk's invasion would only lead to world wars. At the very least, they could still struggle and resist, or even defeat, their enemies. At this moment, There was only despair. The banyan tree king was also in despair. Not to mention the fact that he wasn't a world god. Even if he became a true world god and became the chief butler of this world, he would only be able to catch a few thieves who had snuck into the manor. At most, he would be able to deal with a few bandits. But now, he was facing the pressure of an army. Resistance would be a massacre, and surrender would also be a massacre. The sea of trees to the north of the Mist province seemed to have entered harsh winter. Under the grey sky, they began to wilt and wither. A butterfly fluttering in the air suddenly floated down without any warning, accompanied by the endless rustling of fallen leaves. The rats and rabbits in the forest ran wildly, and the wild beasts were rampaging. As if they felt that a great disaster was about to befall them, millions of forest birds screamed and flew into the sky, trying to migrate to the south. Their wings covered the sky, but after a moment, they all landed on the ground. In a barbarian tribe, all the barbarians knelt down and prayed to the totem pole, knocking their heads heavily on the withered ground. Only the witch priest wore a cloak made of colorful bird feathers. They danced around the totem pole. He was mumbling something as if he was singing an ancient ballad. The old men were the first to fall without a sound. The middle-aged man became an old man. The shallow wrinkles were deeply etched. Just like the passage of time. He was merciless as tears streamed down his face. The young man turned into a middle-aged man, and they looked at each other in horror. They looked at each other's faces rapidly aging. Before the child could even grow up, he began to age, quickly exhausting his life. In the end, only the shaman priest was left. His throat was dry and hoarse, and his movements were slow and stiff. He danced among the corpses like a weird puppet show. Suddenly, his strings were cut off, and he fell to the ground dead. The tribe was silent. The shaman suddenly stood up and lowered his head to see a body draped in bird feathers. He then realized that it was him. Before he could think further, an uncontrollable feeling filled his soul. He recalled the famine many years ago where there was no food for several days and he thought that he was going to starve to death. The feeling he had now was 100 times worse than that. The corpses on the ground rose to their feet and turned into ghouls. Without a single second of hesitation, the corpse ghosts began to kill and devour each other. It didn't matter if they were father and son or brothers, they only cared about satisfying their hunger. This was a curse that the hungry ghost realm had bestowed upon all corpse ghouls. Low-level corpse ghouls had no way of resisting this instinct. There were countless such situations. The banyan tree king felt aggrieved. It would have been better if he had been devoured by her samdi flames of white bone. At least it wouldn't have been so painful. In the 6 paths of reincarnation, the hungry ghost realm was an evil path second only to the hell realm. As long as one experienced it, they would understand that hunger was a form of torture. Finally, the shaman priest was the only person left in the ancient tribe. His strength had even increased, but the hunger didn't vanish. He flew into the withered forest in search of new food. However, turning into a corpse ghost did not mean that there was a chance for them to survive. Through the process of elimination like GU refinement, even if they turned into corpse ghosts, none of them would survive. The rest would become food. And when the 9 regions were completely devoured by the hungry ghost realm, the powerful corpse ghosts would surge in. Even if the living beings of the 9 regions turned into corpse ghosts, they would not be able to escape the fate of being devoured. Only humans, demons, and mutants who were originally powerful cultivators would have a chance to survive. The banyan tree king could not be bothered with the other provinces. He gathered all of his strength in Towering City. His leaves all shone with resplendent, green light, protecting all living beings within a range of 5,000 kilometers from the corrosion of death. In the imperial court of the dragon province, Dragon Chi rushed into the air and turned into the form of a true dragon. It coiled up on Dragon's Head Mountain and watched as the grey sky drew closer. They only guarded the imperial court and did not care about the outside world. Apart from these 2 places, only the kings of the various provinces could contend with it. The formations of regular sects could only protect themselves. Cultivators would not be corroded so easily, but it was only a matter of time. The foundation they relied on for survival was about to cease to exist. Apart from turning into corpse ghosts, There was no other path. Suddenly, the Banyan Tree King discovered that the most crucial force to stop the hungry ghost realm's devouring was actually the demon caverns. Thousands of strands of demon chi were like beacons and smoke, stopping the gray in the sky from spreading. The demon domain was not one of the 6 paths of reincarnation, but in terms of world level, it was no worse than the hungry ghost realm. No matter how vicious the demon folk were, they were still living beings. When the laws of the 2 worlds clashed, the hungry ghost realm's devouring and expansion would slow down until the demon caverns were cleared. This was no longer a simple seal, but stealing food from the jaws of a tiger. It had completely severed the connection between the 9 provinces and the demon domain. The demon caverns were like the sharp, messy spines of a fish. They needed to be picked out carefully, or the 9 provinces would truly become the underbelly of the fish. Don't tell me this step was also within her expectations. The Banyan Tree King thought to himself. Over the past few months, she had rampaged through the world, unleashing a massacre across the various provinces and basically opening up most of the demon caverns in the world. Not only could they stop the hungry ghost realm's devouring, but they were also the best path of retreat. Otherwise, even if she ascended right now, she would probably only ascend to the hungry ghost realm. It was not that he could not predict this step, but he would never think like that. As his goal was to become a god of the world, he could not even seal up the demon caverns in time. How could he allow the demon folk to invade? Right now, he could not afford to care too much. He immediately opened up all the demon caverns of various sizes in the Mist province, using his surging demon chi to fend off the grey haze of deathly chi that constantly spread. He could not help but sigh inside. Perhaps only by being emotionless and desireless can she reach the limits of intelligence. But if she really is emotionless, she should leave this world right now. On the grasslands of the Liang province, the northern wind ruffled her white monk's robes. Suddenly, she looked back. In the distant sky, countless eyes passed through the barrier between realms and gathered on her. This feeling was like a child observing a tiny insect in a glass container. Contempt, curiosity, playfulness, of course. And caution. That was because she was not a regular insect, but a venomous insect that was rumored to destroy the hungry ghost realm. These gazes were only cautious, not fearful. They were existences that had the right to gather around this glass container. If it were not for the glass container, any one of them would have been able to sweep through the 9 provinces. As a matter of fact, just their gaze alone could make a person's will collapse. However, she was unfazed. She only understood. The ghost tower was still built in the end. Master, let's go to the demon domain. It'll be too late once the hungry ghost realm completely devours the 9 provinces. The pairs of eyes made the forsaken immortal sword soul shiver. It even felt fear. It could not turn to another sword master. If it became enemies with these opponents, it would definitely be destroyed. There were many demon caves in the Liang province, and any one of them could lead to the demon domain. As long as she reached the demon domain, the hungry ghost realm could do nothing to her. They could not even send ghouls to kill her. However, she shook her head. Take me to the 5 ultimate graves. The 5 ultimate immortal had left behind 5 graves. They all called themselves realms and floated in the 9 provinces. The soul of the painting tomb was not the dragon king of the sea. The soul of the sword tomb abandoned the sword for the immortal. Now, only the zither tomb, the book tomb, and the chess tomb were left. The forsaken immortal sword soul said, "That is just a waste of time. The cultivators of this world are too weak to find the 5 graves. There are even many ghost immortals and corpse immortals in the hungry ghost realm. The 5 graves are connected to the 9 provinces. When this world is completely devoured, there will be nowhere for us to escape. I have made up my mind. There is no need to say more." A grave was a grave. Hiding in a grave was really an inauspicious sign. However, before he returned, she would not leave, even if she was buried in a grave. Fine. She and the sword became one, twisting and turning, and piercing through the void. Under the sky-reaching ghost tower, the hungry ghost suddenly spat out a black coffin. It flew into the sky and crashed to the ground.